Hello and welcome back to my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Let's begin. It's clouds! Nojiko exclaimed as she, Ryuma, and Zoro struggled to maintain their balance on the fluffy surface. That's interesting, Luffy said, still standing on the beach, unimpressed. Just then, a second group of soldiers, equipped with swords and strange skates similar to those worn by the masked man, leaped from the beach and landed on the clouds, skating toward Zoro, Ryuma, and Nojiko. Before they could attack, Luffy called out, "Hang on, you three," and leaped onto an unoccupied stream of clouds between them. He then moved his right palm forward at the incoming soldiers. The soldiers, seeing no immediate threat, paid him no mind. Suddenly, an invisible force struck them, knocking them back off the clouds. The captain, Koni's, Pagaya, and Luffy's entire crew were bewildered. What was that? Nojiko asked. That's a more advanced form of armament, Luffy explained, turning to them. But you're not ready for that, he added, reaching into his coat to pull out two BLNDFLDS. Nojiko and Zoro stared at him, realizing what he intended. Here, put these on, Luffy instructed, ignoring their astonished expressions. You can't be serious? Zoro asked, looking at his captain. Luffy simply held out the BLNDFLDS, his expression unreadable. We could die. Nojiko exclaimed. Then don't die, Luffy replied with a shrug, causing everyone's jaws to drop. You all need to get stronger quickly. I plan to conquer the Grand Line, bring the four emperors to their knees, and become the king of the pirates, he said seriously. For that, I need the strongest people on my crew. Zoro and Nojiko exchanged glances before Zoro shrugged and took the BLNDFLD. You can't be seriously thinking about trying this? Nojiko protested, turning her attention to Zoro, who was tying the BLNDFLD around his eyes. If this will help me become the strongest swordsman in the world, then I'll do it, Zoro declared. If it kills me, then it wasn't meant to be, he added as he tightened the BLNDFLD. I'm surrounded by crazy people, Nojiko muttered to herself before taking the BLNDFLD from Luffy. Just so you know, if I die here today, I'm going to haunt you, she warned, causing Luffy to chuckle as he returned to his position on the beach. As he landed, he noticed his crew staring at Zoro and Nojiko with worried expressions. Don't worry, everyone, Luffy said, catching their attention. Your time will come, he added with a smirk, sending a shiver down their spines. Luffy thought to himself that training Robin might be the most challenging, given her unique abilities. He wouldn't allow any of them to die. Hearing the rumble of thunder, he realized that the so-called god of Skypiea possessed a lightning-based devil fruit. Luffy had been holding back, wanting to see the look on his opponent's face when he revealed his own Logia fruit. Given that Enel's fruit seemed to have a lightning element, it was likely a paramecia or Logia type, neither of which posed a threat to Luffy but could fetch a high price on the market. Luffy smirked at the thought before his expression turned serious as he prepared for the upcoming fight. The captain of the White Berets watched his men climbing back onto the clouds, ready to attack again, still bewildered by what had just happened. One moment they were attacking, and the next, they were sent flying back by an unseen force. The leader of the White Berets was perplexed by the situation unfolding before him. He thought to himself that Blue Sea dwellers were typically weaker upon arriving at a sky island, unaccustomed to the thin oxygen at such altitudes. He wondered just how powerful Luffy must be to come all this way and still pose a significant threat. Doesn't matter though, they're all insignificant in the eyes of Almighty Enel, the captain muttered, refocusing on the impending battle. Nojiko and Zoro stood on separate streams of clouds, blindfolded, as a large group of soldiers charged toward them. Nojiko gripped her three-section staff behind her back, relying on her remaining senses and observation Haki to anticipate the soldiers' attacks. Zoro, with only two swords drawn, felt confident that he could handle the situation without much effort. He was an experienced swordsman, and while he would use his observation Haki, he believed he could manage without it. Both Nojiko and Zoro steadied themselves, preparing to confront their enemies. As the soldiers approached, they dashed forward at incredible speed. Nojiko swung her staff diagonally, striking one of the soldiers wielding knives. She then flipped and landed on another cloud, surrounded by soldiers. Spinning her staff like nunchucks, she leaped into the air and shouted, "Demonic whirlwind." Wind blades shot out in all directions, hitting the soldiers around her. Luffy watched in awe, noting the power of Nojiko's attack but also recognizing the lack of control. Thankfully, none of the wind blades reached the crew on their ship, who were all amazed, especially Nami. She felt a surge of determination to become stronger, not wanting to be left behind by her sister. The remaining soldiers charged at Zoro, who met them head-on, both swords drawn. He held them up like horns before spinning and slashing the air around him. Two-sword style, Rhino cycle, he yelled, sending wind blades towards the soldiers and knocking them back onto the beach. After a brief moment, Nojiko and Zoro removed their BLNDFLDS to see the unconscious white berets scattered across Angel Beach. Luffy sighed, questioning the point of blindfolding them if they were using such wide-range attacks. "Good job, you two," he said, gaining their attention. Before they could respond, the leader of the white berets called out, "Sorry, criminals. You should have followed my orders. Among the law enforcers here on Skypiea, we of the white berets are the most lenient, but they are not nearly as forgiving." Nami gasped, fear crossing her face. "Congratulations, you are now considered second-degree criminals. You can cry for mercy, but you will be judged by the priest of Upper Yard." Luffy shrugged, unfazed. "Haven't these people realized by now that we don't really care?" he said, walking over to Zoro and Nojiko. "For what it's worth, I'm looking forward to experiencing God's judgment," he added with a chuckle, excitement gleaming in his eyes. As Luffy, Zoro, and Nojiko made their way back to their ship, they left behind a beach littered with unconscious soldiers. Upon reaching the ship, the crew gathered to discuss their next move. "Luffy, is it really a good idea to anger this Enel guy?" Nami asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Something got you worried, Nami?" Luffy replied, leaning against the ship's banister and looking at her curiously. "It's just that I saw what Enel could do, and his power seems formidable," she explained. "He summoned a giant beam of light from the sky that struck down a man searching for gold," she said, causing Usopp and Chopper to look alarmed. "It sounds a bit like what you did, Luffy, when you made that marine base island disappear back in the east," Sanji remarked, and Zoro nodded in agreement. "It does sound similar, but it seems like a weaker version," Luffy replied, causing Chopper to gaze at him with admiration. "Luffy, you're so cool!" Chopper exclaimed, his eyes sparkling as Luffy chuckled and patted the little reindeer's head. "Don't worry, Nami," Luffy reassured her, turning to meet her gaze. "I won't let anything happen to any of you," he said with a smile, which brought smiles to their faces as well. "Besides, this could be a good training exercise for all of you," he added, causing their expressions to pale and smiles to fade. Luffy was about to continue speaking when Konis caught everyone's attention. She stood beside the ship, looking up at them with an unreadable expression. "I feel the need to tell all of you something," she said. "There is a cloud current that I can lead you to, which will take you directly to the White Sea and from there to Cloud End, where you can safely return home." Her words surprised everyone, though Luffy and Robin narrowed their eyes in suspicion. "Once you get onto the current, no one will be able to chase you," she added. "That sounds amazing!" Nami exclaimed. Luffy and Ryuma exchanged glances, both wearing forced smiles before Luffy spoke to Konis. "That does sound great, thank you, Konis," he said, still smiling as he looked down at her, causing some crew members to glance at him curiously. "Tell you what, we need supplies to repair our ship and some food for the journey. Do you think you can help us with that?" he asked, maintaining his smile. "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "Great!" Luffy said happily, causing his crew to feel uneasy since they had never seen their captain act this way before. "Why don't you go get everything prepared, and some of the guys will come to help you bring it back to the ship," he suggested. Okay, she replied and began making her way back to town. As she walked away, Robin spoke up. Captain. I know, Luffy interrupted, turning to his crew and dropping the smile. She is setting us up for a trap, he said, surprising the remaining members of the crew. What? The Straw Hats exclaimed in shock. Don't be ridiculous, Luffy, Nami protested, unwilling to believe that the kind girl who had been helping them would betray them. Konis has done nothing but help us. Why would she set us up for a trap? She asked, staring at her captain. Yeah, Captain, Nojiko added, agreeing with her sister. Don't you think you're being a bit too paranoid? Luffy raised an eyebrow at her. I have to say, Luffy, Usopp chimed in, trying to reason with his captain. She's been nothing but nice to us. I find it hard to believe she would try to set us up, he said, causing Luffy to sigh while noticing Sanji getting ready to speak. Yeah. Konis is too beautiful to be bad. Sanji exclaimed, pointing at Luffy. However, bad could be good, he added with a chuckle, earning a smack on the head from Nami and Zoro. Perverted cook, Zoro muttered, causing Luffy to shake his head. You guys are too naive, Robin said suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. When comparing her speech patterns and behaviors from when she first met us to her interaction with the captain just now, there's a clear difference, she explained, and Luffy nodded in agreement. Her words lacked emotion, and she seemed nervous to speak to us. She was clearly lying about leading us to the current, she concluded. But why would she do that? Nojiko asked, looking at Luffy and Robin. I don't think she wants to do it, but rather that she was told to, Luffy replied, and Robin nodded in agreement. What do you mean? Usopp asked. Let me ask you this, Luffy said, turning to look back at the shores of Angel Beach. If your god gave you an order, would you refuse to follow it? He asked, and a few of them began to understand what he meant. Anyway, it doesn't matter, he said with a sigh, turning back around. We'll play along for now, he decided, causing them to nod. So, who is going to meet up with her? Zoro asked. Sanji and Usopp will come with me, Luffy replied, looking at his sharpshooter and cook. The two nodded and stepped forward. The rest of you wait here. If this god of theirs decides to attack, defend yourselves at all costs. I do not care whose blood you have to spill, just make sure you don't die. Nami, you're in charge until I get back, he said seriously, earning a firm nod from his crew. Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp then hopped off the Going Merry and made their way toward Konis's house. When they arrived, they saw Pagaya and Konis preparing lunch boxes and other supplies for the crew. Here, let me help you with that, Sanji offered, moving over to assist Pagaya. Usopp inspected the supplies while Luffy sat down on the couch and poured himself a drink. Konis and Sanji chatted as Usopp and Pagaya discussed the supplies. Luffy, meanwhile, focused his observation Haki to cover the distance between the beach and the house. After about 30 minutes, Luffy suddenly sprang to his feet, alarming the others in the room. Without saying a word, he walked swiftly out to the balcony and looked toward his ship. Luffy, what's wrong? Usopp asked, joining him. It has begun, Luffy replied, continuing to stare at the ship. Sanji and Usopp looked in the direction of the Going Merry and noticed it rocking back and forth as if in turbulent waters. What's going on with the ship? Sanji asked, pulling out a mini telescope for a better look. There's something under it, Luffy answered, his observation Haki revealing the presence beneath the ship. It seems to be a giant lobster, he added nonchalantly. While the three Straw Hats discussed the situation, Konis and her father exchanged worried glances. It is the Super Express lobster, Pagaya said quietly, capturing the crew's attention. It is a messenger of Enel, he added with a grim expression. Before he could say anything further, Luffy's voice interrupted him. He casually remarked that the ship was sailing away, causing everyone to turn their attention back to it. They saw that the ship was moving backward, even though the sails had not been released. The only conclusion they could reach was that the lobster was pulling the ship. Luffy noted that the creature must have been waiting for them to weigh anchor. Usopp, slightly panicked, asked what they were going to do now. Luffy then looked over at Pagaya and inquired where the lobster was taking their friends. Pagaya, with a hint of worry in his voice, suggested it might be taking them as a sacrificial offering. Luffy narrowed his eyes as Pagaya explained that if that were the case, it would lead them to the sacrificial altar located at the northeast of Upper Yard. The old man elaborated that their ship and friends were now hostages, and it was up to the three of them to retrieve them. He began explaining the layout of Upper Yard and what they needed to do to get there. Although Luffy listened, he had no intention of following anyone's rules but his own. Suddenly, Luffy asked with a smirk where they could find a boat to reach Milky Road. Pagaya suggested that Konis could lead them to the Angel Beach docks to acquire a suitable vessel. Luffy and his crew members stood up, looking at Konis, and he cheerfully stated that they would be in her care. The group of four made their way to the docks, with Konis leading the way while Sanji, Luffy, and Usopp followed. As they walked through the main shopping district called Lovely Street, Luffy admired the beautiful sights. However, he noticed that the patrons were avoiding them. Usopp commented on how people were trying to steer clear of them, and Sanji explained that word had likely spread about their status as wanted criminals. Luffy shrugged it off, saying it was nothing new, which made his crew chuckle. Konis looked back at them, asking if they knew they could die. Luffy responded with a light-hearted remark about how everyone has to go sometime, surprising her. After a short walk, they arrived at the docks of Angel Beach, where Luffy sensed they were being followed by the leader of the White Berets. Konis led them to a small boat docked at the end of the dock, introducing it as the Crow. She informed them that their exit was gate number 2, which would lead to Milky Road, though she trembled slightly as she spoke. Luffy, raising his voice, questioned if this was where the second part of her trap was set. Konis's eyes widened in shock, and she stammered, asking if he knew. Luffy replied that she wasn't very convincing as a villain, which prompted her to drop to her knees and sob. She confessed that she had called the Super Express lobster on their friends, explaining that once someone was identified as a criminal, they had to be led to Upper Yard, or else the penalty was severe. Suddenly, a voice from a distance yelled at her, questioning her actions and expressing concern for their safety. Luffy remained silent, looking at her with an emotionless expression. Just then, a bright light in the sky captured everyone's attention, and the surrounding patrons began to back away in fear. Luffy narrowed his eyes and stepped closer to Konis, pulling her close as a beam of white light descended from the heavens, preparing to engulf them. He wrapped one arm around her and raised the other into the air. For a brief moment, his palm turned black with a strange aura before the beam of light impacted it. The onlookers gasped in astonishment, never having imagined they would witness such a phenomenon. As the beam made contact with Luffy's palm, it parted around him, never touching Konis. The light lasted for 5 minutes before disappearing, leaving Luffy and Konis standing on an island in the middle of a giant hole. One onlooker exclaimed in shock that Luffy had withstood Almighty Enel's judgment, while another questioned his power. Konis, who had kept her eyes closed during the event, finally opened them to see the strange surroundings, her eyes widening in disbelief. Before she could react further, she felt herself lifted by the waist and thrown into the air, letting out a startled cry. Just as she processed what was happening, someone caught her mid-air. It was the Sky Knight. "Keep her safe, old man," Luffy instructed. The Sky Knight assured him that this one was on the house. Luffy nodded and leaped from the small island, landing next to Sanji and Usopp. Gonfall, astonished, remarked on Luffy's power, not realizing he could stop one of Enel's attacks. Luffy smiled and addressed the onlookers, declaring that the Scythians needed to stop looking down on the Blue Sea dwellers. "As powerful as I am, there are still people out there who are more powerful than me," he said, causing Gonfall to nod in understanding while the onlookers looked on in shock. They all thought to themselves, there are people more powerful than him. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Sky Knight," Luffy said before he walked over to the small ship that Konis had previously prepared for them. "I have a god to confront," he added as he hopped into the small boat with Sanji and Usopp behind him. The three of them boarded the boat and began sailing towards gate number. They sailed up the milky white stream of clouds for about 5 minutes before a giant forest came into view. "Whoa!" Usopp exclaimed, staring at the upcoming forest. "Is that giant forest the upper yard?" he asked in astonishment. "Just look at the size of those trees." Luffy had to admit, even he had never seen trees this big before. As they got closer, they began to see the entrance, decorated with torches and spears adorned with animal skulls. "This must be the entrance," Luffy noted as the small ship sailed through the milky road leading to the forest. As they ventured further, they saw multiple shipwrecks, all sliced in half. What could have sliced these ships like that? Sanji wondered, staring at the numerous destroyed vessels. Just then, a giant sickle came swinging in, poised to slice the tiny ship in half. "Watch out!" Usopp yelled, his eyes wide at the approaching sickle. Luffy unsheathed his sword and swung it horizontally, effectively slicing the giant sickle in half, causing the bottom half to fall into the cloud sea while the top half missed the ship completely. "We're safe," Usopp sighed in relief. "We're not out of the woods just yet," Luffy replied, pointing ahead at multiple giant sickles swinging across the stream. "They must have set up traps to eliminate the weaklings," he suggested as both he and Sanji moved to the front of the ship. "I'm kind of insulted that they think so." "Little of us," Sanji remarked, adding armament Haki to his leg. "You and me both," Luffy agreed, holding his sword up to his eye line. After navigating a series of traps and avoiding dangerous sky creatures, the trio sailed towards a giant statue with 4 entrances. "Which entrance should we take?" Usopp asked as he steered the boat. "Ordeal of Ball, Ordeal of the Swamp, Ordeal of String, and Ordeal of Iron. Which should we choose? Is it just me, or do none of these sound like much of an ordeal?" Sanji commented, examining the entrances. "Let's go with Ball," Luffy said, sitting at the back of the boat. "It sounds the least threatening." Usopp nodded and turned the boat towards the entrance labeled Ball. The small boat then entered a pitch-black tunnel. "I can't see a thing," Sanji said, squinting to get a better view. "What if this is like one of those games?" Luffy suggested, capturing Sanji and Usopp's attention. "You know, pick the right door and you get a prize." "And what if you pick the wrong door?" Usopp asked, alarmed. "Well, it could be something like if you picked the wrong door, you fall off the island," Luffy said casually, causing his shipmates to go pale. Soon, a light at the end of the dark tunnel began to shine through. When the ship emerged from the tunnel, they found themselves at a drop-off that showed no bottom. "DMN," Luffy thought, his eyes widening slightly. The small boat then proceeded to fall, prompting everyone to hold on for dear life. They fell for about 10 seconds before the boat landed back onto the milky road. "That was intense," Luffy said calmly. He wasn't too worried about falling off the island since he could easily summon a thunder cloud to catch their fall. "I thought I was going to die," Usopp said, lying flat on the floor with tears streaming down his face. Once everyone regained their composure and looked around, they saw they were in a forest filled with floating ball of clouds. The milky road twisted and turned among the trees. "Well then, let's get on with it," Luffy said, prompting Sanji to nod and begin driving the small boat. As they sailed forward, Usopp noticed the ball of clouds coming close to the ship. He reached up to push one away, and suddenly, a snake popped out, ready to strike. Luffy sprang to his feet and caught the snake just in time, preventing it from getting too close to Usopp. "Ah!" Usopp screamed before fainting back. Luffy tossed the snake into the stream and then turned his attention to the right side of the forest, where his observation Haki alerted him of someone's presence. "You might as well come out," Luffy called out. "I know you're there." "Ho, ho hoo," someone laughed. "Listen well, children, these are mystery clouds. You never know what will come out of them," a man said as he floated in on a giant sphere of clouds. "I am so glad you chose my ordeal, the ordeal of Ball," he said happily, dancing around on the large ball. He was a round-shaped man with fair skin and long, dark red hair, wearing a white jumpsuit adorned with golden rings, an orange hat, orange gloves, shoes, and large yellow sunglasses that obscured his eyes. "Stop dancing and tell us who you are," Sanji shouted in frustration. "Nami and the others better be okay, or else I'm going to tear you apart," Sanji said darkly, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at him. Luffy thought to himself that he was officially a bad influence on people as he sighed. "Oh, the sacrifices," the large man said with a jolly smile. "If they escape, they will die, and if they are sacrificed, they will also die." "Ho, ho, hoo," he laughed, prompting Sanji to growl in frustration. "If you want to get to them, you first need to defeat me, which I don't see happening." "Ho, ho, hoo," the man mocked as he leaped from the large ball he was standing on and floated toward the small boat where the 3 straw hats were. "He is heading this way," Usopp yelled in panic. "Quick, Sanji, Luffy, do something." Sanji stepped forward, raising his left leg to kick the large man. "Oh ho, a left kick," the man said as he approached. Sanji ignored him and aimed a kick at the man, expecting to hit him in the midsection. To his surprise, the man dodged mid-air. However, he didn't notice Luffy appearing right next to him. As the man's head turned slightly, he saw the straw hat-wearing pirate standing to his left, his eyes widening in shock before Luffy sent him flying back with a backhand. "He knows observation Haki," Luffy observed as the man collided with one of the giant trees. "You should be able to handle him, given the training you had," Luffy added, turning his attention to his 2 crew members. "What do you mean us 2? Usopp asked, not liking the sound of Luffy's statement. "I'm going to leave him for the 2 of you to handle while I go look for the others," Luffy said with a smirk, sending shivers down Sanji and Usopp's backs. "Think of it as a little training exercise," he added. "Is now really a good time for a training exercise?" Usopp asked, causing Luffy to chuckle. "Of course, no time like the present," Luffy replied with a smile as he began calling his thunder cloud. "It should be a good experience for you too. You finally get to fight someone who is somewhat proficient with observation Haki. This will help you improve your own Haki along with your battle skills," Luffy finished just as his thunder cloud pulled up beside the boat. "Good luck," he said before stepping onto the thunder cloud. "What if we die?" Usopp asked in a panic. "I don't know," Luffy shrugged. "Walk it off," he smirked, causing Usopp to go pale. "Relax, Usopp," Sanji said as he lit a cigarette. "It's 2 of us against 1 of him." "We'll be fine," Sanji reassured, and Luffy nodded. "Yeah, and both of you know Haki." "You'll be fine," Luffy encouraged Usopp. "Just imagine how Kaya will react when she hears how the brave Usopp defeated one of the priests on an island in the sky," he said, using Usopp's desire for recognition to motivate him. "That's just unfair," Sanji thought to himself, shaking his head at his captain. "Yosh! I have no fear. Captain Usopp will defeat all of his foes," Usopp declared, striking a pose and pointing to the heavens, causing Luffy to chuckle. "That's the spirit," Luffy said as he walked to the back of his thunder cloud and sat down on the throne made of clouds. "Good luck, you 2, he said, and they nodded at him before his cloud sped off into the skies above Upper Yard. "Where do you think you're going?" came the voice of the priest Luffy had sent flying. The large priest leaped off the ground, hoping to stop Luffy, but before he could reach the cloud, something hit him in the gut and exploded upon impact. "Exploding star," was the last thing Luffy heard before the cloud ascended into the skies above Upper Yard. Once the thunder cloud hovered a few hundred feet above the giant forest, Luffy sat back in his throne and closed his eyes, activating his observation Haki to its maximum capability. He sensed everything happening on the island, knowing where everyone was, how many people were there, and what they were doing. Zoro, Robin, Ryuma, and Nami were walking through the forest, likely trying to find the rest of the crew, while Nojiko and Chopper were back on the ship doing repairs. Luffy sensed someone approaching them but wasn't worried, Nojiko could handle it on her own, and Chopper's presence only added to their advantage. Everything was under control, even Sanji and Usopp were gaining the upper hand in their fight. Luffy was pleased with his crew's progress and thought he could just sit back and relax while they dealt with the priests. He focused on Zoro, Nami, Ryuma, and Robin, as it seemed they had discovered something interesting. Thanks to his observation Haki, Luffy overheard their conversation about how Upper Yard was once part of Jaya and had been knocked into the sky by the knock-up stream. Luffy mused to himself about the incredible force that must have caused such an event. He poured himself a drink and looked toward the center of the island, smirking. "I know you're watching, Enel," he thought with a chuckle. Suddenly, he sensed a large group of people approaching Upper Yard at high speed, causing him to narrow his eyes. "Looks like a lot of people want to have an audience with this god," Luffy said to himself before taking a sip of his whiskey. "Too bad he won't be alive much longer," he added. He then sensed that Sanji and Usopp had defeated the priest and were making their way toward the shrine where Nojiko and Chopper were. Speaking of which, it seemed Nojiko and Chopper had also managed to defeat the priest they were facing, which made Luffy smile. He willed the cloud to head in their direction, knowing it would be the best place for him to be. When the cloud was directly over the shrine, Luffy stepped off and began falling toward the ship. He was worried about being a few hundred feet in the air, but he maintained a calm look while holding a glass of whiskey. Like a cat, he landed softly on one of the banisters of the upper deck, surprising Chopper and Nojiko. As he looked at the ship, his eyes widened in shock. "What happened to my ship?" he yelled, noticing multiple holes in the hull and the absence of the mainmast. "Luffy!" Nojiko and Chopper cried out in happiness. Tears filled Chopper's eyes as he ran toward his captain and leaped into Luffy's arms. "Luffy! I'm sorry!" Chopper cried into Luffy's chest. "That priest's spear set the mast on fire, and I tried to put it out, but it wouldn't go out. So, I had to break it off and throw it into the water." Chopper sobbed. Luffy sighed and smiled, patting the little reindeer on the head. "All that matters is that you're okay," Luffy said warmly, making Chopper wipe away some of his tears. He then placed Chopper down and turned to Nojiko. "What about you? Are you okay?" he asked, standing in front of her. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, sounding a bit tired. "That guy was more troublesome than I imagined with his strange javelin and strings," she said, pointing to the body of a man lying on the main deck. Luffy walked over to the body and chuckled. My, you sure know how to steal a man's heart," Luffy joked, noticing the priest was missing his heart. He picked up the man's weapon to examine it. After a few moments, he crushed the javelin, causing a small red seashell to fall out. "Is that one of those dials that Koni's told us about?" Nojiko asked, approaching him. Luffy bent down to pick up the shell. "It would appear so," he replied, examining it. "Interesting, very interesting," he added, turning his attention back to the ship. Luffy thought to himself that he regretted not paying closer attention to what was happening on the ship. "Sanji and Usopp should be here by nightfall, assuming they don't run into any more priests," he said to Nojiko and Chopper. "And Robin, Zoro, Ryuma, and Nami should be back around the same time," he added. "How do you know that?" Nojiko asked, raising an eyebrow. "I was up there watching all of you," he said, pointing to the thundercloud above the ship. "Kind of regretting not paying closer attention to you too," he added, glancing at the mainmast. "While we wait, Chopper and I will start repairing the holes in the hull," he said, looking at the little reindeer. "Go grab some supplies from below deck," he instructed. Chopper transformed into his heavy point and went to fetch the materials they needed. While waiting for Chopper to return, Luffy and Nojiko heard a series of explosions coming from another part of the forest, causing them both to narrow their eyes. "Sounds like a party," Nojiko said, walking over to the dead priest and picking him up. "I sensed a small army heading toward the island," Luffy said, looking in the direction of the explosions. "It's being led by that gorilla that attacked us earlier," he added. "Seems we are not the only ones with a problem with this Enel," Nojiko said, tossing the priest's body off the ship and into the sea of clouds. "Yeah, well, their problem is not ours," Luffy said, removing his captain's coat and hanging it on the side of the ship. He picked up a toolbox from the main deck and hopped off the ship to assess the damage to the hull. "DMN," Luffy said, staring at a medium-sized hole. "I don't know how much more of this you can take, Mary," he sighed, placing his hand on the hull. "Here are some supplies I found, Luffy," Chopper said as he hopped off the ship carrying some wood. Luffy smiled slightly at him before they began repairing the holes in the hull together. They worked for about an hour until the sun started to set. Luffy wiped the sweat from his forehead and sensed 3 individuals approaching from the left of the shrine. Emerging from the forest were Zoro, Robin, Ryuma, and Nami. The 4 looked relieved to see their captain, but that relief turned to shock as they noticed the condition of the ship. "What happened to the ship?" they exclaimed. "Is everyone all right?" Robin asked. "Everyone is fine," Luffy replied, placing the hammer back into the toolbox. "You guys stay over there," he added, confusing them. "It's getting late, we'll set up camp over there," he said, and they nodded. Just as he finished speaking, the sound of something hitting the water caught everyone's attention. They turned to see Sanji and Usopp sailing in on the Crow. After a brief reunion, they gathered supplies and made their way into the forest not far from the shrine to set up camp for the night. Sanji began preparing food while Usopp and Zoro got a large bonfire going. As they set everything up, Luffy's observation Haki alerted him to someone approaching at high speed. As the figure got closer, Luffy recognized it was the Sky Knight, the old man arriving on his strange bird with a worried expression. His worried look later turned into surprise when he saw all the straw hats sitting around without a care in the world. "You are all alive?" the old man exclaimed in astonishment. "Sounds like you were expecting us to die," Luffy said as he sat down on a giant tree trunk. "I knew you were powerful, but I didn't expect the rest of your crew to be just as powerful," he admitted, clearly indicating that he had expected some of them to perish. "What are you doing here, old man?" Luffy asked, shaking the man out of his shock. "We didn't blow that whistle," he added. "Yes, well, I heard that the Shandorians launched an attack against Enel. I thought you all would have been in trouble," he said, causing some of the straw hats to smile at him. "Well, why don't you join us tonight?" Nojiko suggested as she popped open a bottle. "I cannot," the old man replied, waving his hand in front of him. "Come on, old man," Luffy urged, pouring 2 glasses and handing one to the old man. "Enel is going to be defeated tomorrow, let's have a drink to celebrate that," he added. "Shouldn't we drink after he is defeated?" Gonfall asked. "We can do that too," Luffy replied, causing the old man to chuckle before taking the glass and sitting down beside him. "You lot sure are confident," he said as he sipped his drink. "This so-called god isn't all that powerful," Luffy remarked before taking a sip of his drink. "He is nothing more than an ant pretending to be a dragon," he said seriously as Sanji began serving food. Gonfall looked at Luffy for a few seconds before he smiled. "The Blue Sea World sure is an interesting place," he thought to himself before taking another sip of the drink. The crew then sat around the fire, recalling the events of the day. Sanji and Usopp recounted their encounter with the priest named Satori. Nojiko and Chopper followed with their fight against the priest named Shura. To say Gonfall was surprised would be an understatement. He could hardly believe that this group of young people had defeated not 1 but 2 priests. It sounded unbelievable to him. Nami and Robin then shared their discoveries about the island and its connection to Jaya. Everyone was astonished to learn that the City of Gold did not sink into the ocean as they had believed, but instead shot up into the sky. The excitement over the potential treasure was palpable. As the night went on, the crew celebrated the thought of becoming wealthy when they found the gold. Gonfall then shared that he was the former god of Skypiea, which surprised everyone, including Luffy. He explained how Upper Yard came to be and the legends passed down through generations. The entire crew was captivated by his story. When Luffy heard him mention the island singing, he remembered the golden bell that Cricket had told them about. That song you are talking about must be the bell that Old Man Cricket told us about, Luffy said, causing some of his crew members to nod in recognition. Well then, old man, Luffy said, getting Gonfal's attention, lucky for you, I was already planning on ringing that bell. This caused the old man's eyes to widen before he chuckled and shook his head. You know, you guys remind me of another group of pirates that came up from the Blue Sea world about 20 years ago, he said, surprising Luffy's crew and causing Luffy to smile slightly. That pirate you are talking about, Luffy said before taking a sip of his drink, his name was Gold Roger, wasn't it? He asked, causing everyone to go silent and stare at Gonfal, waiting for confirmation. Yes, do you know of him? Gonfal asked, prompting Luffy to chuckle while the others looked on in awe. The king of the pirates came to Skypiea. Usopp said in astonishment. We made it here just like Gold Roger. Nami added, equally amazed, causing Luffy to chuckle at their reaction. I know some people who were on his crew, Luffy told Gonfal, who nodded in acknowledgement. The crew continued to share stories and drink for the rest of the night until they all fell asleep. Next day. The next morning, they woke up to the startling discovery that their ship had been completely repaired by a mysterious person whom Usopp claimed to have seen late last night. It puzzled everyone, especially Usopp. Who could it be? He asked as he walked around the deck of the ship. And how did they know what the Mary looked like before we equipped the flying gear? He continued to question. Does it really matter? The ship is fixed, Nami said, folding her arms. Luffy stood on the upper deck, staring at the figurehead of the Mary with narrowed eyes. It can't be, he thought to himself as he gazed at Mary. He stared for a few more seconds before shaking his head to clear his thoughts. Luffy, Robin said, getting his attention. There are some ruins located just south of here, where the City of Gold is believed to be. I would like to go examine them, she said, causing Luffy to nod. Take Zoro and Nojiko with you, I sense those Shandorians are back on the island, Luffy instructed before walking down from the main deck. The rest of us will try to get the Mary off this shrine before I go take care of Enel. We will all meet back up at the ruins, he said, prompting her to nod. Robin, Zoro, and Nojiko then set out for the lost City of Gold. Luffy, Gonfal, Nami, Sanji, Usopp, and Chopper began brainstorming ways to get the ship off the altar. Usopp and Chopper attempted to pull it off using the small boat that Konis had loaned them, but unfortunately, the small boat did not have enough power. After trying various creative methods to get the ship off the altar for about an hour, Luffy finally decided to do the one thing he had been avoiding since arriving on the island, make Ryuma use his devil fruit. Looks like I got no choice, he thought to himself before addressing the crew. All of you get on the ship, and Ryuma, get into your hybrid form, he ordered as he climbed aboard, leaving the crew puzzled. What are you going to do with Ryuma, Luffy? Chopper asked curiously. He is going to pull it off, Luffy replied, raising eyebrows among the crew. But we already tried that, the crow doesn't have enough power to pull it off the altar, Nami pointed out. I wasn't planning on using the crow, Ryuma said as he began removing his coat and sword, handing them to Luffy. He positioned himself in front of the altar stairs, causing Gonfal to widen his eyes in shock. Ryuma then transformed into his hybrid form, leaving Jin and the rest of the crew equally surprised as he wrapped his arms around the figurehead of the Going Merry. Ryuma planted his feet firmly on the ground and began to pull. He's not really planning on pulling the entire ship by himself, is he? Sanji asked, staring at Luffy. I think he is, Nami replied in disbelief. So cool. Chopper exclaimed, his eyes sparkling as he watched Ryuma. As Ryuma strained to pull the ship, his muscles bulged, and sweat appeared on his face. To everyone's astonishment, the ship began to rotate. Yeah. You're doing it, Ryuma. Usopp cheered as he felt the ship starting to turn. With a show of strength, Ryuma turned the entire ship 90 degrees so it faced the stairs. Okay, everyone go stand at the front of the ship, Ryuma instructed, wiping the sweat from his brow. As the crew gathered at the front, the Going Merry tilted slightly, but it still wasn't enough to slide down the stairs. With one final effort, Ryuma pulled, and the ship slid down the altar steps and into the cloud sea. Ryuma let out a sigh of relief and reverted to his normal form. Luffy took a step forward but was halted by a bright flash across the sky. He quickly extended his observation Haki to check on the 3 crew members still fighting. He saw Zoro and Nojiko battling the remaining priests, with Nojiko having already defeated her opponent. Zoro was struggling against his opponent, outnumbered by the Shandorians. But it was Robin who caught Luffy's attention. It seemed God had visited her while she explored the ruins. Without warning, Luffy transformed into lightning and shot up into the sky toward Robin. Nami and the crew watched with worry as Luffy disappeared. "Where is Luffy going?" Chopper asked, hopping onto the rails. "Something must have happened," Sanji said, lighting a cigarette. "That bright flash." It was Enel, Gonfall noted, increasing their concern. "With Robin." Robin was sitting against one of the ruins, her eyes barely open and her body covered in bruises. Enel had appeared moments earlier, discussing the ruins and the gold that once existed there. When she mentioned the Golden Bell, it was clear he didn't know its location. After she lied about not knowing what was written on the ruins, he attacked her, claiming he didn't like lying women. As she stared up at the sky through half-closed eyes, she noticed a bright light descending, thinking it was Enel returning to finish what he started. She closed her eyes, accepting her fate. Instead of pain, she felt something soft touch her cheek, prompting her to slowly open her eyes. A blurry figure in black and a straw hat knelt beside her. "Hey there, gorgeous," she heard Luffy's voice say, and she opened her eyes wider to see him smiling warmly, one hand gently rubbing her cheek. "See Captain," Robin whispered weakly. "SH," Luffy said, placing his finger over her lips. "Save your strength." He examined her wounds and added, "Don't worry, Robin. No one is ever going to hurt you again. I promise." His strong conviction brought tears to her eyes. Luffy carefully picked her up in his arms and transformed into lightning, teleporting back to the ship. "Thank you," Robin whispered just before they vanished. They arrived on the main deck with a lightning strike that startled everyone aboard. "Chopper." Luffy called for his doctor, prompting the little reindeer to rush down to the main deck. "Robin!" Chopper exclaimed upon seeing Luffy carrying her. He quickly grabbed his medical bag to treat her, followed closely by the rest of the crew, rushing to their injured friend. Luffy laid her down on the deck for Chopper to examine. "What happened to her?" Chopper asked as he assessed her wounds. "She is covered in electrical burns," he noted. "Apparently, she had a run-in with a powerful being," Luffy said in a low tone as he swung his captain's coat around, allowing it to rest on his shoulder before turning to his crew, anger evident on his face. "This so-called being has the audacity to harm a member of my crew," he said, his voice chilling as sparks of energy flickered around him. The once clear sky darkened with ominous clouds, blocking out the sun and making it feel like night had fallen during the day. Lightning flashed across the sky, striking the forest of Upper Yard, each bolt followed by a thunderous roar that shook the island and echoed down to the blue sea. The Straw Hats exchanged worried glances, thinking, "I've never seen him this angry." "Well then, let the battle begin," Luffy declared in a cold tone, clenching his fist as sparks danced around him. Gonfall and the remaining crew members stared up at the stormy sky where Luffy had disappeared. Gonfall wore a bewildered expression, having never witnessed anything like this before. "I have never seen the heavens this angry," he whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's not the heavens," Sanji replied, lighting a new cigarette. "It's just our captain who is angry," Nami added, still standing near Robin and Chopper, who was tending to Robin's wounds. "What should we do now, Nami?" Usopp asked, turning to their navigator. Nami pondered for a moment before responding. "For now, we need to get the ship away from Upper Yard," she said. Just then, a bolt of lightning struck the sacrificial altar, obliterating it completely. Debris flew in every direction, some heading toward the ship. Sanji, Usopp, Ryuma, and Gonfall sprang into action to protect the Going Merry. Sanji kicked away some of the debris, Usopp used his slingshot to shoot down others, Gonfall wielded his javelin to deflect the incoming projectiles, and Ryuma cut through the debris with his sword. Nami's right, Sanji said, kicking another large rock away. We need to get out of here. Who knows how much power Luffy is going to unleash? Everyone nodded in agreement. Chopper, you should take Robin inside, Nami instructed, glancing at the little reindeer. Aye. Chopper replied, transforming into his heavy point and picking Robin up in a bridal carry before heading inside. Sanji moved to pull up the anchor while Nami and Usopp untied the sails. We're going to have to use the crow to push us since there's no wind here, Usopp said, hopping onto the crow. He rigged the small boat that Konis had loaned them to the back of the Going Merry and activated the dials, allowing it to propel the ship forward. The crew began sailing out of Upper Yard the same way they had entered. They were startled when someone landed on the main deck. Thinking it was an enemy, they quickly turned with weapons drawn, but relaxed when they saw it was Nojiko, standing in the center of the deck with her 3-section staff around her neck. You all weren't planning on leaving me here, were you? Nojiko asked with a smile. Where are the others? She inquired, noticing Luffy, Zoro, Robin, and Chopper were missing. That Enel guy attacked Robin, Chopper is treating her inside. Zoro hasn't returned yet, and Luffy went to confront Enel, Nami explained. Is Robin alright? Nojiko asked, concern etched on her face. She has some burns, but she seems to be okay for the most part, Nami replied, causing Nojiko to nod in relief. She then looked up at the sky and chuckled. I take it Luffy is beyond angry, she said. That's putting it lightly, Nami, Sanji, Ryuma, and Usopp replied in unison. The Merry began its journey to exit Upper Yard with Gonfall directing them. With Zoro. Zoro stood inside a dome made of barbed wire like clouds, surrounded by 5 Shandorians, one of Enel's priests, for peculiar goat-like creatures working for Enel, a giant dog, and a giant snake. It had been a strange fight. Every time Zoro made progress against the priest, he was interrupted by the Shandorians or the dog. Fortunately, he had avoided serious injuries thanks to his observation Haki. He wasn't taking things too seriously, having only drawn 2 of his swords and not yet using his armament Haki. The fighting paused as the sky turned black with thunder and lightning. You all should just give up, the priest said, resting his sword against his shoulder. There is no escaping Almighty Enel's prophecy. He has grown impatient and is ready to deliver his divine judgment. The priest's words drew a chuckle from Zoro. I don't know about your god, but it looks like my captain is very angry, Zoro said, capturing everyone's attention. Your captain, like the rest of you Blue Sea dwellers, is weak, the priest began, but was abruptly cut off by a bolt of lightning that broke through the dome and struck him down. When the lightning dissipated, everyone was shocked to see the priest lying flat on his back, with Luffy standing above him, his foot pressing down on the priest's head. I'm going to ask a question one time, and if you want to live, you will answer me, Luffy said, his expression fierce as he glared down at the priest beneath his foot. Where is Enel? He asked, increasing the pressure on the priest's head. His foot covered the man's mouth, preventing any response. Not going to answer, huh? Well, that's too bad, Luffy said, intensifying the pressure. The onlookers gasped in shock at the scene. The priest, one of Enel's strongest warriors, had been subdued so easily. How dare you, shouted the men in white robes as they rushed at Luffy from behind. However, Luffy remained still, unfazed. Take this, they yelled, pointing their palms at him. Axe dial, they shouted, activating their dials to send pressurized wind blades toward Luffy. He merely stared at them with a bored expression as the blades approached, cutting through him. To everyone's astonishment, Luffy's body transformed into wind and reassembled as if nothing had happened. A Logia user, whispered the leader of the Shandorians. That was a big mistake, Luffy said, raising his right hand and summoning wind around it. Kaze no amen, he declared. A multitude of wind blades shot from his hand, engulfing the 4 attackers and erasing them along with everything behind them. When the attack subsided, there was no trace of the men or the ruins behind them. Is everything all right, Captain? Zoro asked, glancing at Luffy. God paid Robin a visit, Luffy replied in a cold voice. Is she all right? Zoro inquired. She's fine. She is with Chopper now, Luffy assured him, scanning the area. I think he is up there, Zoro said, pointing at the giant beanstalk. Luffy looked at the towering structure, which seemed to reach the heavens, a remarkable sight given their altitude. Well then, let us bring Almighty God down from his golden throne, Luffy said, anger evident in his voice. He approached the edge of the dome near the beanstalk, holding his right hand out before clenching his fist, summoning pitch-black lightning around him. Second gear, he announced, the lightning intensifying with Haki as thunder rumbled in the sky. Luffy pointed his fingers away from the beanstalk. Heaven's sword, he declared menacingly, slashing the air and leaving a trail of black lightning. Moments later, a thunderclap shook the island as the giant beanstalk was sliced in two. He just cut Giant Jack down with his fingers, one of the Shandorians whispered in awe and fear. What is he? Another asked. Even Zoro was taken aback. He had thought nothing could surprise him about Luffy anymore, but he was wrong. The sight of Luffy slicing a giant beanstalk with just his finger was astonishing. The black lightning was a new ability he had never seen before, revealing that there was much more to Luffy's powers than he realized. The beanstalk, known as Giant Jack, began to fall toward the west of the island. Angel Island. Everyone, look, a Scipion shouted, pointing toward Upper Yard. Giant Jack is falling. The crowd turned to see the beanstalk tilting more with each passing second. What is going on over there? The leader of the White Berets asked, alarmed. First the heavens turned black, and now Giant Jack is falling. What is Enel doing? Is this all because of those blue sea dwellers? Someone asked in fear. Do you think they are responsible? Another questioned anxiously. People, please remain calm, the captain of the White Berets urged. We of the White Berets shall protect you. On the Going Merry. The Straw Hats had anchored some distance from the island. They were fortunate to encounter Konis and her father, who had come to guide them to safety. Using a series of dials, they helped the crew navigate a shortcut out of Upper Yard. Father, look, Koni said, pointing at Giant Jack. Giant Jack is falling. Oh my, you're right, Pagaya replied, gazing up at the beanstalk. What could have cut down such a mighty tree? Gonfall wondered. Luffy, the Straw Hats replied casually. With Luffy. As the beanstalk fell, Luffy spread his arms wide, looking up toward the heavens. What's the matter, God? He shouted, knowing Enel was above them. Afraid to show your face, he taunted, trying to provoke the so-called God. I guess you're not much of a god after all if you're too scared to face me, a lowly human. Luffy chuckled mockingly. Just then, a bolt of electric blue lightning struck down behind him, revealing a man holding a golden staff. How dare you speak to me, a god, in such a manner, Enel said coldly, his expression fierce. You should be on your knees begging for mercy, he added arrogantly, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow. Luffy was more intrigued by Enel's appearance, a pale-skinned man with a well-toned build and notably long earlobes adorned with gold earrings. Upon his back, centrally positioned between his shoulder blades, was a large gray ring, attached to which were 4 wooden shimdaiko drums set next to and above his head. Each drum had a cream-colored skin depicting a black mitsudomo on both the front and back. Luffy had encountered many strange individuals during his time on the Grand Line, but this one certainly stood out. While Luffy was distracted by the man's unusual appearance, Enel continued speaking. Realizing he had missed part of the conversation, Luffy shook his head and replied with a slight smirk, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Could you repeat all of that? You scoundrel! Enel shouted, pointing his staff at Luffy. Sango, he bellowed, releasing a massive charge of electricity from his hand. The energy traveled through the golden staff and blasted toward Luffy, who stood still, seemingly unfazed. The blast engulfed his upper body for 3 seconds, but when it dissipated, Luffy's upper half was completely restored, as if nothing had happened. "Were you not paying attention?" Luffy asked, his expression bored. "I am the embodiment of elements. Your attacks mean nothing to me," he stated with a smirk, which quickly faded as he spoke in a chilling tone. "You are either a paramecia type user, a Logia type user, or perhaps a mythical Zoan user. Either way," he said before vanishing and reappearing in front of Enel, delivering a powerful punch that sent the god crashing into the ruins, leaving him coughing and disoriented. "He just sent Enel flying like it was nothing," remarked a Shandorian warrior wielding 2 pistols, while another stared in awe at the scene unfolding before them. "Hey! Blue Sea Dweller," yelled a Shandorian, clearly the leader. "Enel is mine to defeat, and right now you're in my way," he declared, advancing toward Luffy. Luffy replied, glancing at the approaching warrior. "You're the one who attacked my crew in the White Sea," he noted, raising an eyebrow. "You couldn't handle my crew, and you think you can fight me?" "What arrogance," he said coldly. "This is none of your business, Blue Sea Monkey," the warrior shot back. "Stop meddling in our affairs," he yelled, continuing his advance. "I could care less about you and your people," Luffy responded, causing the warriors to growl in frustration. The warrior activated the dials on his shoes and charged at Luffy. "Wiper, no," shouted the other Shandorian warriors. Luffy watched as Wiper closed in, leaping up to kick him in the chest. "Fool," Luffy thought, bracing for the impact. To everyone's surprise, Wiper's kick connected with Luffy's chest but did not pass through him as expected. Luffy was equally astonished. "Sea Prism Stone," he realized, feeling a sudden weakness wash over him. Wiper took advantage of the moment, planting both feet on Luffy's chest, further sapping his strength. "Being from the Blue Sea, I'm sure you know about Sea Prism Stone," Wiper said with a cocky grin. "Is that it?" Luffy replied weakly, looking up at the warrior, who growled in response. "Sure, Sea Prism Stones weaken Devil Fruit users, but they don't take away our powers," he explained, surprising Wiper. "They just make us feel weak, which hinders our control over our abilities," he continued. "But when you have the power of lightning like I do, who needs control?" With that, Luffy unleashed a surge of electricity, shocking Wiper and causing him to collapse, unconscious. Luffy stood up, dusting himself off, and glanced in the direction where he had sent Enel flying. "Wiper is down," one of the Shandorians said, concern etched on his face. "What should we do?" another asked. "I suggest you take your leader and leave," Zoro advised them. "If the captain is going to cut loose, you don't want to be around when it happens," he warned. Without hesitation, they grabbed their leader and fled, having witnessed both Enel's and Luffy's powers. "How dare you do this to me, you insufferable brat!" Enel growled, picking himself up. "I am a god," he yelled, wiping blood from his mouth. "I've had enough of you." Lightning crackled around him as he grew taller, his appearance shifting slightly. His hair stood on end, his muscles became more defined, and his expression turned fierce. "Allow me to show you the divine power of my human fruit, Model Amaru," he proclaimed arrogantly, spinning his golden staff. "Arrogant as ever," Luffy sighed, shaking his head. He turned to Zoro and said, "Get out of here, Zoro." Zoro nodded and leaped off the island cloud. Luffy raised his right hand, surrounding it with lightning and enhancing it with armament Haki, turning it into black lightning. "Second gear," he declared, clenching his fist and absorbing the black lightning into his body. Sparks of black lightning danced around him as he narrowed his eyes. "You made a big mistake messing with a member of my crew," he said coldly. "Now you are going to face the consequences," he said in a chilling tone before he kicked off the ground and dashed forward towards the god at top speed, leaving destruction in his wake. Enel, aware of Luffy's impending attack thanks to his observation Haki, found himself unable to block in time. Luffy appeared before him, moving faster than lightning, and delivered an uppercut that sent Enel soaring into the sky. Luffy then bent his knees slightly, narrowing his eyes at the so-called god ascending into the thundercloud-infested sky. He kicked off from the ground, traveling straight up and breaking the sound barrier in the process. Regaining some of his senses, Enel looked down and saw Luffy flying towards him at blinding speed. Gritting his teeth, he tapped two of the drums on his back with his golden staff, causing them to glow electric blue. He pointed his staff at the incoming Luffy and yelled, "God's judgment." Lightning surged from his hands through the staff, and a large beam shot directly at Luffy. Expecting Luffy to be unable to dodge, Enel smirked victoriously as the beam approached. However, Luffy merely smirked back and transformed into a bolt of black lightning just as the blue beam impacted him. Enel's expression shifted from triumph to horror as he saw the beam turn black from the bottom up. When the entire beam transformed, it vanished, revealing Luffy floating directly in front of him. "Thanks for the assist," Luffy said coldly, causing Enel's eyes to widen in shock. Noticing something shining to their left, Luffy decided to investigate. He covered his fist in lightning-infused Haki and punched Enel toward the glint he had seen. "Gungnir!" Luffy exclaimed as his fist connected with Enel's face, producing a loud thunderclap that echoed throughout Skypiea. Enel was propelled toward the island cloud, breaking the sound barrier once again. As Luffy watched Enel fly toward the island cloud, he transformed into a bolt of black lightning and shot up into the thunderclouds, using the electricity particles to travel faster. When Enel reached the island cloud, a bolt of black lightning struck him in the chest, sending him crashing down onto the cloud. Upon impact, his body bounced back up about 3 feet. It was then that Luffy appeared again, slamming his foot into Enel's stomach and forcing him back down into the cloud, causing him to cough. As Enel coughed, his body shifted back to its original state, and the lightning around him faded. "Would you look at that," Luffy said, glancing to his right at the giant golden bell resting on the cloud. "That must be the bell that Nolan talked about in his journal," he noted, admiring it. He also spotted the poneglyph attached to the base of the bell. "Robin is going to want to see that," he thought as he stared at the poneglyph. "That dot is mine." Enel growled weakly, catching Luffy's attention. "It will be a great addition to the arc maxim," he added in a hoarse voice, prompting Luffy to raise an eyebrow. "What is an arc maxim?" Luffy asked, intrigued. "It is the ship I've been building for the past 6 years. Cough cough, Enel replied. "After I defeat you, I will destroy this sky island and send it back to the blue sea world before taking that bell and sailing on to endless Earth." Luffy regarded him as though he were crazy. "I have news for you," Luffy said, leaning down to whisper in Enel's ear, "you are not going to survive the next 10 minutes. His chilling tone sent shivers down Enel's spine. I can't die," Enel protested, staring at Luffy with wide eyes. "I am a god," he insisted, but Luffy shook his head. "For the last time," Luffy said coldly, lifting his leg off Enel only to slam it back down into his midsection, causing him to cough again. "You are not a god," Luffy shouted, stomping on Enel further until he dropped his golden staff. Luffy eyed the staff before picking it up and twirling it in his hands. I did see myself as a proper swordsman," he mused, placing a hand on the sword strapped to his side. "But this staff also feels right in my hand," he concluded with a chuckle. Luffy then summoned his thundercloud, which hovered beside him before revealing a large fruit basket filled with various fruits. He looked back at Enel with a smirk. "You have such a rare devil fruit," he said with a smile. "You wouldn't mind if I take it, would you?" Enel's eyes widened in horror. Luffy laughed coldly before continuing in a menacing tone, "Well, you don't really have a choice." Turning Enel onto his stomach, Luffy grabbed both of his arms and pulled them back. "Wait. No, stop." Enel begged, feeling the pressure on his arms. "Have mercy. Please," he pleaded, but Luffy's expression remained cold and emotionless. "Did you show my crew member mercy when you harmed her?" Luffy asked menacingly before snapping both of Enel's arms back, the sound of his shoulders dislocating echoing in the air. Enel screamed out in pain. Luffy let go of his arms and walked over to Enel's legs. He covered his right foot in Haki and stomped down, causing Enel to cry out in pain. "Did you even think of showing her mercy?" Luffy asked, moving to the other foot. "Or was she just an insect for you to crush?" With another stomp, he broke Enel's left foot. Enel screamed loudly, and Luffy turned him over, placing the bottom of his newly acquired golden staff on Enel's chest. "This is going to hurt," Luffy said in a cold tone as black lightning surged from his hand through the staff and into Enel's body. The scream that followed echoed throughout Skypiea, sending chills through the sky's inhabitants. "Hurts, doesn't it?" Luffy asked with a smirk. The next day, Luffy stood on the rear deck with a glass of whiskey in hand, reflecting on the previous evening's celebration of Enel's defeat. The Straw Hats, along with the Shandorians and Scypians, had thrown a large feast filled with singing, dancing, and laughter. Most were still recovering from the festivities, while some were already exploring the upper yard. Sanji was in the kitchen with Nami and Robin preparing breakfast, Zoro trained off to the side with Ryuma, and Nojiko chatted with Konis and her father on the main deck. After enjoying a delicious meal, the crew and their new friends set off to explore the island in their own ways. Usopp tried trading items from the Blue Sea with the Scypians and Shandorians, while Nami, Nojiko, and Chopper searched for gold. Zoro and Ryuma continued their training, and Sanji sought out local cooks to exchange recipes. Only Luffy and Robin remained on the ship, standing on the main deck and gazing into the giant forest. "Shall we go see this bell?" Luffy asked, prompting a smile and nod from Robin. They hopped off the Going Merry and walked through the forest toward the bell, arriving to find a large crowd gathered, led by Gonfall and the chief of the Shandorians, all staring at the poneglyph attached to the bell. "Chief, what does it say?" a Shandorian warrior inquired as Luffy and Robin made their way through the crowd. "It is an ancient text," the chief replied, looking apologetic. "It is impossible to read." At that moment, Robin stepped forward and began to read the words etched into the stone. "We shall know the true meaning and utter it to no one," she said, walking out of the crowd with Luffy. The chief's eyes widened in shock. "It is our legacy to be the inheritors of history and our duty to protect it with the sounding of the Grand Belfry," she continued, while Luffy smiled beside her. "Those words," the chief said, astonished. "How do you know them?" "Those words were described on a wall in one of the ruins of Shandora," Robin explained as they stood in front of the poneglyph. "Long ago, your people were entrusted to be its guardian, correct?" "You can actually read those texts?" the chief asked, but Robin remained silent. Luffy gazed up at the giant poneglyph, hearing a faint voice in his mind. "It talks about one of the ancient weapons, doesn't it?" he suddenly said, surprising everyone around him. "Ancient weapon?" a Shandorian echoed in disbelief. "Why would it have that on there?" another asked. "You can read what it says?" Robin asked, turning to Luffy. "Not exactly," he replied, removing his straw hat and running a hand through his hair. "More like I heard it tell me what was on there," he said, leaving everyone confused. "All I know is that it talks about a great weapon. It talks about the ancient weapon Poseidon, a weapon named after a god," Robin said, continuing to read the poneglyph. "It even tells its location." "I already know where Poseidon is," Luffy stated casually, shocking Robin. "You could even say I've seen it already." "Hey look," a Shandorian warrior called, pointing to the side of the poneglyph. "There is more stuff engraved on the side." "Joel. D. Roger," Robin whispered in surprise, catching Luffy's attention. They moved closer, clearing some vines before Robin began to read the new writings. "I have come here and will lead this passage to the farthest ends of the world," she recited, puzzled. What did the Pirate King mean by that, and how could he write the ancient text? "He couldn't write it," Luffy said, placing his hat back on his head. He had someone on his crew who could, he added, causing Robin's eyes to widen. Who? She asked, hopeful to find another like herself who could read the ancient text. A man named Kazuki Oden, he revealed, surprising her. He's gone now, but he was the one who wrote that statement, he said, chuckling lightly. Don't worry, he reassured her, patting her head. When we get to the new world, I'll take you to Wano country. The land where the poneglyphs were made, he said, causing her eyes to widen in amazement. The land where poneglyphs are made. Robin exclaimed, her voice filled with wonder, making Luffy chuckle at her reaction. She looked like a child who had just been told they were going to visit a chocolate factory. Before anyone could say anything else, Nojiko came running out of the forest, searching for Luffy. Luffy, she called, catching everyone's attention. What is it? Luffy asked, his tone serious. Is something wrong? He added, slightly worried. No, nothing like that, Nojiko replied, trying to catch her breath. We found Enel's ship, she announced, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow, curious about the significance of a ship. It's made of gold, she added, and Luffy's eyes widened in excitement. This I have to see, he said, turning to Robin. Are you going to be okay here? He asked, to which she nodded. He then followed Nojiko, summoning his thundercloud. When it arrived, they hopped on and flew toward the location where Nojiko and the others had found the ship. They arrived outside a cave with a curtain displaying the kanji for God. The duo walked through the curtain and into the cave, where they saw a giant ark adorned with large oars and propellers. What caught Luffy's attention was the enormous golden face on the main deck. Both Shandorians and Scipions were there, gazing up at the magnificent ship. Luffy, look at all that gold, exclaimed an excited Nami as she rushed toward him, with Chopper following closely. Can we take it? She asked eagerly. I don't see why not, Luffy replied, stepping forward to stand directly in front of the ark. Is there anyone on the ship? He inquired, and they all shook their heads. Luffy smiled, and suddenly, his right hand crackled with lightning. El Thor! Luffy shouted as he moved his hand forward, unleashing a massive beam of lightning that engulfed the ark. He maintained the beam for about 30 seconds before it vanished, along with the ship. The onlookers were astonished to see that the giant vessel had been replaced by 20 square blocks of gold, each about 5 feet wide and high. Find a way to get them on the ship, and we'll take them with us, Luffy instructed, dusting off his hand as he walked back toward them. How are we supposed to take all of them back to the ship? Nojiko asked, glancing between the gold and Luffy. Get the Scipions and the Shandorians to help, Luffy suggested with a shrug. Tell Zoro it will make him stronger to carry them back, he added. Ask Sanji, I'm sure he'll be excited if the two of you ask him, Luffy said, providing them with multiple options for dealing with the gold. Has the log reset? He asked Nami. No, not yet, she replied, looking down at her log pose. Well then, I'm headed to Angel Beach, Luffy declared, walking toward the cave's exit. I didn't come to Sky Island to stay on dry land the entire time. I came here to relax on a cloud, he said as he stepped out of the cave. You know where to find me if you need me, he added before leaving. He has the right idea, Nami remarked, watching Luffy walk away. One day later. Luffy was lounging on a chair made of soft cloud under a cabana on Angel Beach, a glass of exquisite wine from Skypiea at his side. The wine was a gift from the people of Skypiea, who treated him and his crew like royalty upon their return. His crew had arrived late the previous night, bringing the Mary from the upper yard to Angel Island. They were scattered across the island, enjoying their well-deserved vacation, and Luffy was content to relax in his comfortable chair, sipping his wine and soaking in the tranquility. Suddenly, the sound of his transponder snail ringing interrupted the peace. How am I even getting a signal all the way up here? He muttered in frustration, glancing at his thundercloud. He reached in and pulled out a small chest filled with transponder snails, searching for the one that was ringing. Finally, he found a small snail with an eye patch over its left eye. A smile crossed his face as he answered it. Paul, my old friend, he greeted into the microphone. To what do I owe the pleasure of this call? Lucifer, a deep voice responded through the snail. I'm just calling to confirm some requests I've received recently. What kind of requests? Luffy asked, taking a sip of his wine. I received multiple requests from individuals in the 4 seas and one from here in the Grand Line to build bases, Paul explained, prompting Luffy to nod. They all claimed that Lucifer Morningstar told them to contact me. One group here in the Grand Line even came to see me in person, he added. Names and locations, Luffy said, his tone serious. Ms. Valentine in the south? Paul asked. One of mine, Luffy replied. Ms. Merry Christmas in the north, he continued. Mine, Luffy confirmed. The bounty duo in the east? Paul asked, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at the codenames Johnny and Yasaku had chosen. Mine, Luffy replied. And a woman named Paula came to see me personally a couple of days ago, Paul said. Yeah, I sent her to you, Luffy acknowledged. She is going to be running the Hino branch, Luffy said into the transponder snail. She mentioned finding an uninhabited island to set up base. I want you to check it out and see if it meets our requirements for the plans we have for the head of the Hino branch. Same plan we came up with? Paul asked. Yeah, the very same, Luffy replied, finishing his glass of wine and pouring himself another. Very well, I will contact my people in those oceans and have them begin construction, Paul said, causing Luffy to nod. Hell's Company has already established itself in all the world's oceans in such a short time. Don't you think you're moving a bit too fast, Lucifer? Paul asked curiously. No, I know the Navy is probably already aware of Hell's Company's existence, but they can never truly grasp the size and magnitude of Hell's reach. By the time they try to do something about it, I will have already sunk my claws so deep into this world that it would be impossible for them to take me out, Luffy said seriously, finishing with a chuckle. Nice to know Paradise hasn't mellowed you out, Paul chuckled. How are things in Alabasta? Things are progressing pretty smoothly here. We finished the second level of the basement a couple of days ago and are currently working on the first level, which should be done in 3 days. After that, we just need to start building the main floor and the docking ports. I have about 150 people working here, so it should take another 2 weeks to finish everything, Paul said, causing Luffy to smile. That is wonderful news, Luffy said, taking a sip of his drink. The princess comes by every couple of days to check on the progress, and I hired a few locals to help with construction. I might hire some more to speed things up, but if we continue at this pace, we will be finished in 2 weeks, Paul said proudly. Luffy smiled at the thought of Vivi checking in regularly. What about the Marines? Luffy suddenly asked. Any trouble? There was a Marine captain who showed up here with his ship, demanding to know what we were building and who we were building it for, but the king got rid of him right before I was about to send him and his ship down to the seafloor, Paul said, causing Luffy to chuckle. But other than that, there has been no trouble, he added, and Luffy nodded. Make sure to give me a call after you inspect the island that Paula found, Luffy instructed. Will do, boss, Paul replied before they hung up. Luffy then put the transponder snail back into the chest but, as he was closing it, he sighed and pulled out a different snail, pushing the button on top. Lucifer, came Isaac's voice through the transponder. Isaac, how are things in the west? Luffy asked with a smirk. Everything is great, business is starting to pick up. We made our first big weapon sale a couple of days ago to a group of rebels fighting a civil war, Isaac said, causing Luffy to smile. Did you try selling to the kingdom they are fighting against as well? Luffy asked. I already sent some people to talk to the king, Isaac replied, and both he and Luffy started laughing. We truly are the scum of the earth, Luffy chuckled. We wouldn't be pirates if we were anything else, Isaac replied with a laugh. True. Anything else you have to report? Luffy asked, taking another sip of his wine. Well, a few hospitals here in the West Blue, to whom we spread the word that the famous Drum Kingdom medicines can only be acquired through us, have started putting in requests for the medicine. I sent a ship back into the Grand Line to deliver the requests to the kingdom and bring it back, but I received word that the kingdom just began medical production again, he said, causing Luffy to nod. I'll give the king a call after I'm done talking to you to see what's going on, Luffy said into the snail. Why did you call me anyway? Isaac asked, reminding Luffy of the reason he called one of his generals. That's right, I called to tell you to distance yourself from Hell's company, Luffy said, confusing Isaac. Why? Isaac asked. Because you are already known for sailing under my flag. I don't want people to find out that I am Lucifer so soon, Luffy explained, and Isaac understood. Let Jiro be the face of things in the West Blue while you oversee everything from the shadows, Luffy instructed. Roger that, Captain. Isaac said. Anything in particular you want me to do from the shadows here in the West? He asked excitedly, causing Luffy to smirk. I want you to build up my fleet there in the West, Luffy said with a smirk. Bring more pirates under my flag, promising new up-and-coming rookies and weaklings my protection if they sail under my flag, Luffy added, causing Isaac to chuckle. Tell them that you can guarantee their safety if they ever decide to enter the Grand Line, Isaac said excitedly, and both he and Luffy chuckled deeply. That's it, Luffy said with a chuckle. I'll get right on that. See you later, boss. Isaac said before hanging up. Luffy shook his head and put the transponder snail back into the chest. Might as well get all of this out of the way now so I can relax, Luffy said before reaching back into the chest and pulling out a larger transponder snail. He dialed a number into it and waited for the other party to pick up. Hello, a man answered politely. Hello, Dalton, how are you? Luffy asked the new king of the Drum Kingdom. Luffy? Dalton asked. The one. And only, Luffy replied, swirling the wine in his glass. How are things in the kingdom? He asked. Everything has been going great. The people are finally happy, and things seem to be picking up, Dalton replied happily. Also, we renamed the kingdom. It is no longer called the Drum Kingdom, it is now the Sakura Kingdom, he informed Luffy, causing him to nod. That is good to know, Luffy replied through the snail. Make sure to let all of my people who come there know to tell their customers, he added. We are already doing that, Dalton said as Luffy heard him rummaging around some papers. We are receiving numerous requests for medicines from all over the world, and we can't seem to keep up with the orders, Dalton said apologetically. Don't worry about it, Dalton, Luffy replied with a smile. Whatever you need, just ask my people, and they'll take care of it. If you need more workers, I'm sure they can help find some for you. If you need facilities built, just let one of my people know to contact Paula, and she'll connect you with my personal architect, he explained, causing the new king to relax slightly. Thanks, Luffy, Dalton said gratefully. You have been a real help to the people of this country. The Sakura Kingdom is one of my territories, it's only right for me to take care of it and its people, Luffy said before taking a sip of his wine. We will forever be grateful to you and your crew, Dalton said through the transponder snail. By the way, how is that little reindeer you took with you? He asked, prompting a smile from Luffy. He's doing great, Luffy replied with a slight smile. He's a fantastic doctor and quite the pirate, he chuckled. I'm sure Dr. Kureha will be happy to hear that, Dalton said, and Luffy nodded in agreement. Call me if you ever need anything, Dalton, Luffy said. Will do, Dalton replied before they hung up. Luffy placed the transponder snail back into the chest and considered calling someone else but ultimately decided against it, closing the chest as it sank back into the cloud. That's enough work for one day, he said with a smirk, pouring himself another glass of exquisite Scythian wine and leaning back in the comfortable lounge chair. 1 week later. A week had passed since Luffy spoke to his subordinates in Hell's company. He stood on the rear deck of the Going Merry, wearing black beach shorts and an unbuttoned red-flowered shirt that showcased his necklace with a lightning bolt, his chiseled abs, and well-toned muscles, along with the tattoo of the Jolly Roger of the red-haired pirates on the left side of his abdomen. The log pose had finally reset, and the crew was preparing to set sail. Usopp, Sanji, Zoro, and Chopper were loading supplies onto the ship, while Nami and Nojiko discussed their return to the Blue Sea with Konis and her father. Robin sat on the main deck, engrossed in a book, and Ryuma stood next to Luffy, gazing at the island. A large group of Scythians had come to see the crew off, waving and cheering at Luffy, who mostly ignored them. "Do you know the next island the log pose is pointing to?" Ryuma asked, drawing Luffy's attention. "Not a clue," Luffy replied, walking over to his throne. "It wouldn't be fun to know where we're going all the time," he added as he sat down. He looked over to the main deck to see Sanji, Usopp, Zoro, and Chopper loading the last of the supplies. "Go get Nami and Nojiko," Luffy instructed Ryuma, who nodded and called for them. While Ryuma did that, Luffy turned to Sanji. "Are we all set, Sanji?" he asked. "Aye, Captain," Sanji replied, looking up at Luffy. "It was a tight fit with all the gold stored below deck, but we got everything," he said, prompting a nod from Luffy. "All right then," Luffy said as Nami and Nojiko boarded the ship. "Raise the anchor and prepare to set sail for Cloud End," he ordered. Chopper walked to the front of the ship to pull up the anchor while Usopp and Sanji released the sails. Nojiko took charge of steering, and Nami and Zoro stood on either side of Luffy. "Konis and her father will be escorting us to Cloud End," Nami informed him, and Luffy nodded. Soon, the sails caught a bit of wind, but the extra weight on board kept the ship from moving. "It looks like we have a problem," Luffy said, raising an eyebrow and staring at the sails. "Don't worry," Usopp shouted, getting everyone's attention. "Captain Usopp shall save the day," he declared, rummaging through his bag before pulling out 2 dials he had received from the Scythians. He climbed to the upper deck, stood behind the main mast, and pointed the dials at the sails. After pressing the buttons on the backs of both dials, a gust of wind blew out, causing the ship to jerk forward and sail out of the port at Angel Island. "So cool!" Chopper exclaimed, eyes sparkling. "Nice one, Usopp," Nami said with a smile. "I'm impressed," Luffy added with a smirk. Usopp laughed proudly at the compliments. As the ship sailed away, the people of Skypiea waved goodbye and shouted praises to their heroes. Off to the side of the Going Merry, Konis and her father guided Luffy and the crew toward Cloud End. The Straw Hats sailed on the white sea for about an hour before Cloud End came into view. "That's Cloud End," Konis shouted, pointing at the structure ahead. It resembled the gate they had seen upon entering Skypiea, though it lacked the golden gates and was smaller. A beautiful rainbow formed a large arch just above the gate. Konis and her father increased their speed, docking their waver off to the side at one of the walkways. As the Merry sailed through the gate, the father-daughter duo ran alongside the ship, shouting their goodbyes. "This is as far as we can go," Pagaya called out. "Take care, you guys," Konis yelled, waving goodbye. "Thanks for everything," Nami shouted back. "We'll miss you," Nojiko added as they sailed further through the gate. "Konis, don't forget me," Sanji called out, hearts in his eyes. "Now take care of yourselves and hold on tight," Pagaya shouted to the crew. "You're in for a bumpy ride," he exclaimed, prompting nods from the crew. The ship then entered a tunnel with a noticeable downslope at the end. The crew braced themselves, ready for a rough descent as they had experienced on the way up. "Hold on and try not to fall off the ship," Luffy said calmly, crossing his legs on his throne, seemingly unfazed. As they slid down, they began to pick up speed. "You guys hold on tight. The free fall is about to begin," Konis shouted just as the Going Merry sailed off the slide and began to plummet toward the blue sea. "Freefall," the Straw Hats thought, horror etched on their faces. Even Luffy's eyes widened slightly as the ship descended from 10,000 meters. The ship fell about 500 feet in roughly 10 seconds before a giant octopus emerged from the clouds, wrapping itself around the ship. "What the heck?" Zoro exclaimed, preparing to cut the octopus, but he was halted as the ship's descent slowed dramatically, almost as if it were floating. Well, this is new, Luffy remarked, gazing up at the giant octopus that seemed to act like a balloon. It's a balloon, Chopper said in awe, staring up at the creature. We're not falling, Nami observed. Before anyone could respond, the entire Straw Hat crew heard the beautiful sound of a giant golden bell tolling. At this speed, it might take us a while to get back down to the blue sea, Luffy said, standing from his throne. I suggest you all get comfortable, he added, walking toward his personal quarters. Navy HQ. Inside the office of the Fleet Admiral of the Navy, a small meeting was underway with several high-ranking Marine officers. Vice Admiral Garp, Vice Admiral Tsuru, and Fleet Admiral Sengoku were present, discussing current world affairs. When will this great pirate era end? Sengoku sighed wearily from behind his desk. Who says it has to end? Garp replied, munching on rice crackers. Sooner or later, someone will find that treasure, then they will die, and the cycle will start all over again, he added between bites. You just had to make my day worse, didn't you, Garp? Sengoku remarked. Bahaha. Yes, I did. Garp laughed, causing Sengoku to groan. What are we waiting for anyway? Tsuru interjected, observing her two friends bickering. We're waiting for Gion to bring the scouting reports for this week, Sengoku replied, leaning back in his chair. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Enter. Sengoku called out. The doors opened, and Marine Captain Gion walked in, carrying a clipboard. Good morning, Fleet Admiral, Vice Admiral Tsuru, and Vice Admiral Garp, Gion greeted respectfully with a slight bow. This week's scouting reports are in from the scouting division, she said, handing the clipboard to Sengoku, who reviewed the documents before passing some to Tsuru and Garp. Anything major to report? Tsuru inquired, looking at the young Marine captain. Nothing too significant, Gion replied, scanning the papers. A civil war has broken out in the Black Raven Kingdom in the West Blue, she noted, causing the three officers to nod. The world sure is a turbulent place, Garp commented as he read through the report. One conflict after another, he added, crunching down on a rice cracker. The Drum Kingdom has a new king and has decided to change its name to the Sakura Kingdom, Gion announced, raising their eyebrows. Who is the new king? Tsuru asked. A man named Dalton, Gion replied, focusing on the female vice admiral. He was a former royal guard under the old king, she added. Is the old king dead? Sengoku inquired. We don't know, Gion answered apologetically. We do know that Vice Admiral Garp's grandson, the elemental demon, was responsible for the old king's demise, she revealed, surprising everyone in the room. The new Sakura Kingdom is now flying the elemental demon's flag, signifying they are under his protection, she said, causing Garp to choke on his rice cracker. What? The three exclaimed in shock. When did this happen, and why weren't we informed sooner? Sengoku demanded, standing up from behind his desk. Apparently, this occurred long before the Straw Hats arrived in Alabasta. We're only finding out now because the kingdom has been quite active recently, Gion explained. Active by doing what exactly? Garp asked, narrowing his eyes, curious about his grandson's activities. It doesn't seem to be anything bad, Gion reassured them. They have just been ordering a lot of supplies to produce medicine once again, she said, prompting them to raise an eyebrow. They are world famous for their doctors and medicine production, Tsuru noted with a nod. And there hasn't been much produced from the old Drum Kingdom in recent years, so this may be a good sign, she added, causing everyone to nod in agreement. So, the elemental demon already has 2 countries under his control, Sengoku remarked as he settled back into his chair. That is correct, sir, Gion confirmed with a nod. It was also reported that there was an incident involving the elemental demon, his first mate, and Bellamy the hyena back on Jaya a week ago, she continued, capturing their full attention. What was the incident? Sengoku asked, raising an eyebrow. From what we gathered, Bellamy took one of the elemental demon's crew members hostage as revenge for an earlier confrontation, she explained, causing the officers to nod. What followed was the complete defeat of Bellamy's crew, with him being the only survivor, she said, causing their eyes to widen slightly. There is a detailed eyewitness report on page 7, she added, prompting them to turn to that page and read through the account. There is no way Bellamy is powerful enough to survive against Luffy and his first mate, Garp noted as he read through the report. It was more like your grandson left him alive as punishment, Gion said, causing the three of them to understand. Do we know why he was there on Jaya? Tsuru asked, her curiosity evident. Reports say he was there to gather information on a sky island, she replied, surprising everyone in the room. Do we know where he is now? Garp inquired. There have been no sightings of the elemental demon for the past week, she said, prompting the Vice Admiral to chuckle. Guess he found the information he was looking for, Garp remarked, and the other two officers nodded in agreement. While we are talking about the Vice Admiral's grandson, Gion suddenly said, drawing their attention once more. It should be noted that the angle of death, Franklin D. Isaac, has been spotted in the West Blue. I only bring it up because it was reported recently that Isaac now sails under the Thunder Demon's flag, she added, causing puzzled expressions to appear on their faces. Why would a powerful pirate from the New World suddenly go to one of the Four Blues? Tsuru asked, her curiosity piqued. We don't know, Gion replied with a sigh. All we know is that he was spotted there. Keep an eye on that, Sengoku said seriously. I doubt he is there of his own accord. It's more likely he was sent. There, he noted, narrowing his eyes. Yes, sir. Gion said, making a note to inform the scouting division to stay updated on this. Anything else to report? Tsuru asked. What about that organization you told us about last time? Garp suddenly asked, prompting the other two officers to remember. Yes, Hell's Company, Gion said as she flipped through a few pages to find the report. Some Cypher Pole agents managed to infiltrate their operations in the North Blue, she said, causing slightly excited looks to appear on the faces of the two Vice Admirals and the Fleet Admiral. However, they were unable to gather any information on who their leader, the mysterious Lucifer, truly is, she added with a sigh, replacing the excitement with disappointment among the occupants of the room. You said the North Blue, what about the other blues and the Grand Line? Tsuru asked. Agents were not able to join, Gion explained, causing everyone to raise an eyebrow. The branches in the other oceans don't seem to be accepting anyone who offers their services. It's more like they scout out who they want to hire and then offer them a job, she added, leading to collective sighs. Do we know anything new about this organization? Sengoku asked. Well, it seems they secured a deal with the new Sakura Kingdom to be the only distributors of their medicines, Gion said, surprising the three older marine officers. There are reports that hospitals from all four blues are placing orders through this organization for the world-renowned medicine from the Sakura Kingdom, she continued, prompting nods from everyone. That's all well and fine, but is there any intel on the illegal smuggling done by this organization? Sengoku asked. Only rumors, sir, Gion replied with another sigh. Nothing concrete, she added. Let's hear these rumors then, Garp said, sitting up straight. Gion nodded and read through the papers for a few seconds before speaking again. It is rumored that Hell's Company supplied weapons to the rebels in the Black Raven Kingdom, which kick-started the Civil War, she said, looking up at the Fleet Admiral. However, this is yet to be confirmed, she added, causing them to nod. I don't like this, Sengoku said with a sigh. Neither do I, Tsuru added, placing the papers down and folding her arms. It is already known to the government that the underworld is well established in the New World, but it was always thought that their reach didn't extend to paradise, and if it did, it wasn't as elaborate as the New World, she explained, prompting agreement from the two men in the room. I think we should start preparing to deal with an all-out war, Garp suddenly suggested, capturing everyone's attention. And why should we do that? Tsuru retorted sharply. There are no signs of a war about to happen, Sengoku said, standing up from behind his desk. Think about it, Garp said seriously. The underworld is already well established, and the people who run it are likely very powerful. This Lucifer is new and expanding rapidly. I don't think people will appreciate him taking business away from them, he concluded, helping everyone understand his reasoning for the war preparation. It will be a war for control over certain parts of the underworld, if not the entire underworld, given the number of interests this Lucifer has, Tsuru said thoughtfully. And a war like that cannot be contained, Sengoku added with a sigh. We could also use this to our advantage, Tsuru suggested, gaining everyone's attention. We can use the war to infiltrate the underworld for a better understanding of it, she proposed. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves, Sengoku said as he sat back down. For now, we should just gather more information, he instructed, prompting nods from everyone. Anything else to report, Gion? He asked, turning his attention to the marine captain standing in the middle of the room. No, sir. Gion replied. Very well, dismissed. Sengoku said, causing Gion to bow and salute before exiting the room. Why can't this job ever be easy, he sighed, leaning back in his chair. What are you talking about? Garp asked with a large smile. It is easy. Bahaha, he exclaimed, causing Sengoku and Tsuru to groan. That's because you don't do anything, they both yelled. With the straw hats. The sun had already set, and the straw hats were lounging around on deck, bored out of their minds. Luffy had transformed his throne into a lounge chair and was lying back, staring up at the octopus balloon. Even he had to admit that it was dull just sitting there waiting for the ship to reach the bottom. I did not think it would take this long, Robin said from her position on the ground. Can't this thing go any faster? Nami asked, letting out a frustrated sigh. Is it just me, or does the balloon look smaller? Sanji suddenly asked, staring up at the octopus. Luffy narrowed his eyes as he observed the octopus balloon, his expression shifting to surprise. The balloon is shrinking, he exclaimed, drawing everyone's attention as he rose from his throne. Nojiko chimed in, I guess it does look smaller than before. Usopp's voice trembled with concern, why do I have a bad feeling about this? Just then, the octopus balloon deflated further, causing the ship to descend rapidly. We are going too fast. Nami shouted, gripping onto anything she could find. Luffy steadied himself and stretched out his arms, sparks of lightning flickering at his fingertips. A massive thundercloud descended from the sky, positioning itself directly beneath the Going Merry. The ship collided with the cloud but continued to fall just as quickly. Luffy clenched his fists and attempted to lift the ship with all his might. Ha! Luffy yelled, feeling the weight of the vessel. The ship began to slow down, but it was still descending too quickly. We're slowing down. Chopper exclaimed, his excitement evident. But we're still going too fast, Nami said, panic rising in her voice as she leaned over the side of the ship to look down. At this rate, we will hit the sea so hard we will sink. That is if the ship doesn't break apart first, Robin added, causing Usopp to perk up. Not on my watch. Usopp declared, pulling out a grappling hook and attaching it to the side of the ship before jumping off, surprising everyone. He maneuvered under the thundercloud and affixed wind dials to it. Once activated, the dials significantly slowed the ship, but the added weight still made their descent too rapid. Everyone, hold on to something. Luffy shouted as he pushed himself harder while the crew pulled Usopp back in, bracing for impact. The Going Merry hit the water with a jolt, shattering the thundercloud and sending waves crashing over the sides of the ship. The sound of breaking items echoed, but the crew was too focused on staying upright to notice. The ship rocked violently in the choppy waters as they struggled to regain their footing. Is everyone all right? Nojiko asked, holding her head as she stood up slowly. Yeah, just a bit shaken, Nami replied, brushing herself off. When they turned to Luffy, they found him still breathing heavily, kneeling on the ground with sweat dripping down his face. You okay there, Captain? Zoro inquired, receiving only a nod in response. Luffy mustered the strength to stand, reaching into his coat for a bottle of whiskey, which he drank from until it was empty. I'm fine, Luffy said, tossing the bottle aside. Usopp, Chopper, check below deck for any damage, he ordered, his voice weary. Aye, Captain. Usopp responded with a salute. You can count on us. Chopper added, transforming into his reindeer form. Nami, Luffy called, catching her attention. Take us to the next island, he instructed, and she nodded in agreement. Luffy returned to his throne, sinking into it with a sigh. I really need to get a ship that can fly, he mused, closing his eyes. The crew had been sailing for about 3 days since they returned to the Blue Sea. Luffy stood at the front of the ship, dressed in a sleek black suit and shiny shoes. His black silk shirt was unbuttoned at the top, revealing his lightning bolt necklace, and his captain's coat billowed in the wind. Notably, he carried a golden staff in his right hand, a gift from Enel. The crew was scattered around the ship, each engaged in their own tasks. Sanji was in the kitchen preparing lunch, while Robin read a book nearby. Usopp sat on the rear deck, tinkering with tools and dials for Nami's Climatact, and Chopper was close by, making medicine to restock his supplies. Zoro trained with a large weight on the rear deck, and Nami relaxed on the main deck, reading a newspaper, while Nojiko kept watch from the crow's nest. Land ho! Nojiko called from above, binoculars in hand. Her voice drew the crew's attention, and they gathered to see the island. It's still pretty far away, Luffy said, leaning against his staff. I can barely see it, he added as more crew members joined him at the front of the ship. There seems to be fog surrounding it, Nojiko noted, causing Nami to frown slightly. Chopper. Go man the rudder just in case we encounter trouble, Nami instructed, and Chopper transformed into his heavy point and rushed to the rudder. It's still quite far, and it will take us a while to reach it with this wind, Luffy remarked, glancing at the sails. The Going Merry sailed forward slowly for about 2.5 hours before they reached the edge of the fog surrounding the island. As they navigated through the mist, the crew felt uneasy due to a strange ship they had encountered earlier, which had no sails or flag and only 5 people on board. When the Merry finally emerged from the fog, they found an island filled with nothing but grass and trees as far as the eye could see. It seems to be uninhabited, Robin observed, gazing out at the landscape. It's just grass and trees, Luffy noted, captivated by the beautiful sight. It's like a blank slate, completely untouched by man, he remarked. What are we standing around for? Usopp asked as he climbed onto the side of the ship. Let's go, he yelled before leaping off the ship, with Chopper following closely behind him. Hey! Don't just jump off like that. Nami scolded, but the duo paid her no mind. They have no sense of danger, she sighed, shaking her head. You worry too much, Ms. Navigator, Robin said before she hopped off. Luffy chuckled and then followed suit, landing on the island. His attention was immediately drawn to a peculiar sight, a long white bear walking upright across the meadow. What the hell? Luffy muttered to himself as he watched the bear. Hey, Luffy! Usopp called out, holding up a red fruit with a bite taken out of it. Check out how long this apple is, he exclaimed, surprising his captain. What a strange place, Luffy commented as he walked over to one of the trees and knocked an apple down with a small bolt of lightning. Chopper, Usopp, and Nojiko wandered off in the distance to examine a house they spotted, leaving Luffy, Nami, Zoro, Sanji, and Robin behind. Luffy knocked a few more apples from the tree and sat down at its base, munching on them while observing the unusual animals on the island. This is truly a bizarre place, Nami remarked as she and Sanji hopped off the Merry, followed by Zoro. How long are we going to stay here, Captain? Nami asked as she approached Luffy. Don't know, Luffy replied calmly, continuing to eat the long apples. We'll figure it out, he added with a chuckle, which made Nami growl in frustration. Captain, we have company, Robin suddenly said, drawing Luffy's attention. He turned to see a large galleon sailing up behind the Mary, its mast adorned with a large Jolly Roger. The ship stopped directly behind them and shot off two large claws that acted as anchors, effectively boxing in the Mary. "Seems like they're looking for a fight," Zoro said, placing his hands on his swords. "We are the notorious Foxy pirates," someone aboard the ship yelled. "We want more than just a fight from you. We want a showdown." This declaration caused Luffy to raise an eyebrow. Why must idiots throw their lives away so foolishly? Luffy sighed, maintaining a bored expression. Few-fei-fa-fei, a voice to Luffy's left laughed, catching his attention. "I am Foxy, captain of the Foxy Pirates, and I hereby challenge you to a davy-back fight," a short man with an unusual hairstyle proclaimed, prompting Luffy to raise an eyebrow again. "Who the hell are you?" Luffy asked, looking at the man. "Why, you don't know who I am?" the man asked, sounding slightly hurt, to which Luffy shook his head. "Not a clue," Luffy replied, causing the man to drop to his hands and knees, sulking. "He doesn't know who I am," he muttered in a disturbed voice while three crew members beside him tried to comfort him. "What is this davy-back fight?" Nami asked, confusion evident on her face. "It's basically a sporting competition between pirate crews where they can challenge each other for crew members," Robin explained, enlightening those who were unaware. "A pirate crew with only 9 members, Foxy said, standing up smugly. "What a bunch of weaklings," he added, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at him before standing up. Captain," a member of Foxy's crew called out, getting his captain's attention. "That's the elemental demon," the man shouted, causing many to gasp in shock. "He is the one who defeated Crocodile," he continued. A slightly scared look appeared on Foxy's face upon hearing this. "Doesn't matter," Foxy declared, clearing his throat to mask his intimidation. "I will still claim victory over you and your pitiful crew." Luffy sighed and shook his head in response. Before anyone could speak further, Nojiko's voice caught everyone's attention. "Hey, Captain," she called out, drawing their focus. They turned to see Nojiko, Usopp, and Chopper approaching, but what caught everyone's eye was what Nojiko held in her hands. She was carrying 2 heads, which, judging by the strange masks around their eyes, belonged to the Foxy Pirates. "These guys attacked a nice old man we just met, so we dealt with them," she said nonchalantly, tossing the heads forward. "They killed Capote and Pickles," the crew aboard the ship cried out in horror, staring at the severed heads of their comrades. Luffy looked back at Foxy and channeled some lightning into his golden staff, transforming it into a trident before speaking. "Well, that is a shame," Luffy said in a bored tone as he turned his attention to Foxy. Panicking, the captain of the Foxy Pirates launched an attack at Luffy before he could respond. Slow beam," Foxy shouted, firing a purple beam of energy at Luffy, who simply stood there and let the beam engulf him. "Was that it?" Luffy asked, feeling neither pain nor loss. "Time to die, I guess," he said as he took a step forward, only to realize his movements had been dramatically slowed. "Ha! That is the power of my slow fruit," Foxy declared proudly. Luffy smirked, then transformed his body into lightning and dashed forward at blinding speed, surprising Foxy and his crew. Luffy appeared in front of Foxy and moved his golden trident into the pirate's chest, looking directly into his eyes with a cold stare. "Some advice," Luffy whispered chillingly, "lightning is still pretty fast even when you slow it down," he said before pushing the trident deeper into Foxy's chest. "Captain!" Foxy's crew shouted in horror. The 3 crew members standing next to Foxy immediately attempted to attack Luffy in anger, but they were intercepted by Ryuma, Zoro, and Sanji. "Ice Age!" Ryuma yelled as he appeared behind Foxy, intercepting the girl who was about to attack Luffy. He swung his arm forward in a whip-like motion, and when the tip of his sword was just an inch away from the girl, it pierced through her heart, freezing her entirely. Ryuma pulled back his sword, and the girl fell forward, her expression lifeless as her body began to disintegrate. Onigiri. Zoro shouted, appearing to Luffy's right just in time to intercept another member of Foxy's crew who was about to attack. He swung all three of his swords, leaving deep slashes across the man's chest and throat. The man stumbled forward, then collapsed, staring up at the sky as he lost consciousness. Collier! Sanji yelled, appearing to Luffy's left and intercepting yet another attacker. He pivoted on his left leg and delivered a powerful roundhouse kick to the man's neck, the sound echoing ominously as the man fell face first, lifeless. Nicely handled, Luffy remarked, nodding at the scene around him. He then turned his attention to the large ship filled with the Foxy pirates, who looked on in sheer terror. "They're all demons," one of the pirates shouted, prompting a smirk from Luffy. "Now why would you say something like that?" Luffy replied, snapping his fingers. At that moment, a beam of lightning descended from the sky, engulfing the pirate ship. The beam lasted only a few seconds before vanishing, taking the ship with it. "Judgment!" Luffy declared quietly as the beam disappeared. He summoned a thundercloud and pulled out a fruit basket from within it. The crew watched in surprise as the fruits began to change shape and color, swirling into strange forms. Did they just become devil fruits? Nami asked, staring at the newly formed fruits. "It's a little-known fact," Luffy explained, picking one up. "When a devil fruit user dies, their fruit regenerates into something similar," he added, tossing the fruit in his hand. "Wow, I've never heard of anything like that in all my years at sea," Robin commented, intrigued. "It's kept quiet by the government and some powerful individuals," Luffy continued, tucking the new devil fruits back into the thundercloud. "It could cause chaos if too many people find out," he added, and the crew nodded in agreement. "Anyway, there's nothing for us to do on this island," he said as everything sank back into the cloud. "Let's move on." The crew nodded and made their way back to the ship, raising anchor and setting sail. After a couple of hours, another island came into view. "I see an island," Nami exclaimed, looking through a telescope. "It seems to be uninhabited," she added as she examined it closely. "Let's check it out," Luffy suggested, prompting Nami and Nojiko to head to the rudder. "Sanji, how are we on supplies?" he asked. "We're not low, but I'd like to have more than we currently do," Sanji replied, and Luffy nodded. "Hopefully, we can find some on that island," Luffy said, gazing at their destination. It took about 30 minutes for the Going Merry to reach the shore. Once anchored, they began exploring the island, venturing into the jungle to gather supplies. "Chopper, did you find any new herbs?" Usopp asked, holding a bag filled with supplies. "Yes, this place has a lot of rare herbs for medicine," Chopper replied, also carrying a bag. "I have a good stock but I'm still looking for more," he added with a smile. "By the way, I noticed something odd a moment ago," he said, glancing down at the ground. "There's a little grove along the trail. I wonder what it is." Everyone looked down at the grove as they continued walking. You're right, that is strange," Usopp noted, observing the grove. "It looks like something came through here," he added, causing Luffy and Robin to narrow their eyes. "Come on, that doesn't make sense," Sanji remarked, turning to Usopp. "There's no one else on the island, why would there be a path?" "I guess you're right," Usopp chuckled. Luffy suddenly stopped to examine the grove, prompting the others to halt as well. He ran his finger across it, glancing back at Robin, who seemed to share his thoughts. "He couldn't possibly be here on the island," Luffy pondered, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "Problem, Captain?" Ryuma asked, noticing Luffy's tense demeanor. "Problem right now?" "No," Luffy replied, standing up. "In the near future?" "Probably," he added, leaving his crew puzzled. He continued walking, and as they exited the jungle, they all sighed in disappointment. "There's nothing here but emptiness," Nojiko remarked, looking around. At that moment, Chopper dashed toward a large rock with a giant mushroom growing out of it. "Wow! I've never seen a mushroom this big." Chopper exclaimed, excitedly running toward it. Luffy narrowed his eyes, suspicion creeping in. I don't think that's a mushroom, Luffy said quietly. Before anyone could ask what he meant, they all saw Chopper get thrown back from behind the rock, causing the little reindeer to fall flat on his backside. Chopper! Zoro and Usopp called out simultaneously as they saw their friend get thrown back. There seems to be something behind the rock, Nojiko noted as she took out her 3-section staff. Let's go. Sanji said before he and the rest of the crew took off running, leaving Luffy standing in the same position, watching his crew charge towards the rock. He let out a sigh. So much for a relaxing journey to the next island, Luffy muttered to himself, shaking his head. He then walked towards his crew, who had already confronted the individual standing behind the rock. When Luffy arrived, he saw Robin on the ground with a terrified look on her face, sweat pouring down as she stared at the man behind the rock. Luffy looked at her with a sympathetic expression before moving to stand in front of his crew, blocking Robin's view of the man. Luffy, this guy is an admiral. Nami said in a slightly panicked voice. He has Robin scared out of her mind, she added, glancing at her captain's back. The fact that this man could frighten Robin so much unsettled her, as Robin was one of the stronger-willed crew members who rarely seemed afraid. If everyone was honest at that moment, they were all slightly scared due to Robin's reaction to the admiral, or in Usopp's case, terrified. What are your orders, Captain? Ryuma and Zoro asked while standing to Luffy's right, 2 of their swords drawn. Robin's reaction may have disturbed them, but they were still ready to jump headfirst into battle at their captain's command. To Luffy's left were Sanji and Nojiko, both prepared to attack like Zoro and Ryuma. Luffy was slightly impressed by the 3 of them but found it somewhat amusing as well. Stand down, Luffy said, surprising his crew. Huh, they all asked simultaneously, confusion evident on their faces. Don't be so eager to rush to your death, Luffy said as he stared at the admiral. He is way out of your league, he added, surprising them further. Even if all of you attacked him at the same time with all your might, the most you could probably do is force him back 2 steps, he said, causing his crew to look at the giant of a man with fear in their eyes. Aren't you flattering me a bit too much, Luffy? The man said in a lazy voice, causing Luffy to chuckle. You're a long way from Navy HQ, Kazan, Luffy said, narrowing his eyes. Just as he spoke, thunderclouds began forming overhead, and the wind picked up, causing Luffy's coat to flutter. And you're a long way from the New World, Kazan replied calmly, staring at Luffy. I'm making my way back there now, Luffy said, a slightly excited smirk appearing on his face. You plan on stopping me? He asked in a tone that was both dangerous and excited as lightning flashed overhead, followed by deafening thunder. Would you calm down? Kazan said with a sigh, noticing Luffy gearing up for a fight. Like I told your crew, I'm just here on a stroll. I wasn't ordered here to capture you, he added before yawning. Luffy didn't believe that explanation for a second. There was no way someone of Kazan's status and power just happened to take a stroll and crossed paths with Luffy and his crew. Besides, Luffy, Kazan said, getting Luffy's attention, you know the motto of justice I believe in, he said, causing Luffy to look at him for a few seconds before sighing in disappointment and beginning to relax. Why are you relaxing, Luffy? Nojiko asked, puzzled. What is his sense of justice? Usopp wondered, noticing that it made Luffy calm down. Lazy justice, Luffy replied with a sigh, causing his crew to sweat drop. Robin remained on the ground, still staring at the Navy Admiral. She couldn't believe that the man would just leave them alone because he was lazy or not feeling up to it. She had witnessed his power firsthand and knew what he was capable of, so she wasn't going to lower her guard. Despite Luffy appearing relaxed, she could tell his guard was still up. Robin was also puzzled by the strange relationship between her captain and the admiral. Even though they were gearing up for a confrontation, it seemed like they shared a bizarre friendship. Anyway, what I was saying was... Kazan began, knocking Robin out of her thoughts. Hold on a minute, he said before lying down on the ground. Being on my feet too long makes me tired, he said in a lethargic voice as he laid on the grass. Luffy stared at the lazy admiral and shook his head while the rest of his crew sweat dropped. Then maybe you shouldn't sleep standing up, Usopp remarked, folding his arms. As I was saying, I have no intention of capturing you, Kazan said, surprising everyone. So, you can all just relax, he added from his position on the ground. I am only here to confirm the location of Nico Robin, who has not been seen since the Alabasta incident, and as suspected, she has been with you, he said, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. I'll come up with some report for headquarters. Now that you've added another crew member with a price on their head, your overall bounty is going to go up as well, Kazan said, holding up his right hand as though he was about to start counting. Let us see, 200 million, he said while pointing at Luffy, plus 200 million, he said as he pointed to Ryuma, and now 89 million, he added as he moved his hand in Zoro's direction before he spoke again, and finally 79 million. He paused and said, that brings your overall bounty up to. Forget the math, he said lazily, giving up. Just do the math, Zoro said, staring down at the man. Cut the nonsense, Kazan, Luffy said seriously, narrowing his eyes. You and I both know the Marines have people for that kind of work. They aren't going to send an admiral just to check on the bounty of a pirate crew, he added, looking down at the laid-back admiral. You make it sound as though you are just any ordinary pirate, Kazan replied, gazing up at Luffy with a slightly serious expression, a contrast to his usual demeanor. Luffy was about to respond when he sensed a group of people approaching from behind. Turning around, he saw a small group exiting the tree line, looking like they had endured a tough ordeal. Is it really true? Are you really a Marine? One of the men asked Kazan. Who are all these people? Nojiko asked, staring at the newcomers. Well, they are probably castaways who washed ashore, Kazan said, drawing everyone's attention. There was a passenger liner reported missing about a month ago, last seen in this area, he explained, propping his head on his hand. I'm guessing it sank, and these are the survivors, he added, causing a few of Luffy's crew to look at the newcomers with pity. Before Luffy could give his crew orders, they sprang into action. Chopper began examining the people and treating any wounds he could, with Nami and Nojiko assisting him. Sanji and Usopp went in search of food for the survivors. Luffy, Robin, and Zoro remained where they were, watching closely, especially Luffy, who stayed near Kazan in case he decided to act. So, what happened to you all? Sanji asked as he prepared food on the grill. We were on our way back from a gourmet tour when a giant frog crashed into the side of our boat, shattering it, one of the survivors explained, causing Luffy to smirk. Come on, everyone knows frogs can only do the breaststroke, Usopp replied skeptically. That's Yokozuna, Luffy said, drawing their attention. He's kind of famous around here, he added with a chuckle. After everyone finished eating, Kazan suddenly stood up, prompting Luffy to narrow his eyes. Everyone gather your things, he instructed the shipwrecked passengers. I know of an inhabited island not far from here. Head there and ask for help, he said, causing the survivors to rejoice. The crew helped them load their belongings into a small cart. Once done, Kazan walked to the edge of the island and dipped his hand into the water for a few seconds. Suddenly, a giant sea king leaped from the water, sending everyone except Luffy and Robin into a panic. Hey! Get out of there! Usopp yelled at Kazan, but the admiral remained still. Watch out! Nami and Nojiko shouted simultaneously, seeing the Sea King moving toward Kazan. Ice Age! Kazan called out. In an instant, the entire ocean in front of him froze over, creating a vast expanse of solid ice. Even the Sea King, which was about to attack, was frozen solid. Everyone except Luffy and Robin stood in stunned silence, jaws dropped and eyes wide. Luffy admitted it was impressive, but he had seen even more astonishing things in the New World. He just froze the ocean, Nami said in disbelief. I can't believe what I'm seeing, her sister added, dropping her three-section staff. To think there are more monsters like Luffy and Ryoma out there, Usopp whispered, though Luffy heard him. It'll stay like that for a week, Kazan said as he approached the group of astonished stowaways and pirates. Head out in that direction, he said, pointing into the distance. Take your time, you should reach the island in 4 days. Be sure to dress warmly, it will be a bit cold, he added before picking up his coat and walking away. Am I dreaming? One of the castaways asked. The sea is as solid as the ground. We can finally cross it and get off this island, he exclaimed, tears of joy streaming down his face. Luffy's crew helped the survivors get their cart onto the ice before waving goodbye. The crew stood with them while Luffy and Ryoma remained on higher ground. As they relaxed, thinking Kazan was gone, Luffy sensed he was still nearby. The crew began making their way back up from the ice, while Luffy and Ryoma watched. Once at the top, they started walking inland, planning to head to their ship, but Luffy knew it wouldn't be that simple. About 10 feet from the shore, they spotted Kazan sitting on the grass, a conflicted look on his face. What's wrong, Kazan? Too tired to return to Navy HQ? Luffy asked nonchalantly. You are as troublesome as your grandfather, Monkey D. Luffy, Kazan replied, causing Luffy to flinch slightly at the mention of his eccentric grandfather. Both of you are so hard to figure out, he added, prompting a chuckle from Luffy, though it was slightly nervous. Luffy's grandfather? Nami asked, curiosity piqued. Come to think of it, we don't really know anything about Luffy's family, Nojiko noted, glancing at their captain. Your captain has a very complicated family tree, Kazan said with a sigh. Especially concerning his mother, he added, increasing the curiosity of Luffy's crew. As Kazan mentioned Luffy's mother, a loud thunderclap reverberated overhead, and dark clouds began to gather in the sky. Luffy, sensing the tension, warned Kazan not to overstep his bounds. Kazan, however, continued, stating that Luffy's grandfather had once helped him, which was why he was there. He wanted to see Luffy and Nico Robin together. But then, a serious expression crossed his face as he threatened Luffy, causing the crew to tense up. Luffy, unfazed, mockingly reminded Kazan of his grandfather's kindness. Kazan acknowledged that while the government might underestimate Luffy's crew, he recognized them as a significant threat, especially with Luffy as their captain. Luffy's crew felt a mix of pride and insult at this acknowledgement. Kazan admitted that despite having fought many outlaws, the thought of Luffy's crew in the future was daunting. Luffy, maintaining his light-hearted demeanor, remarked on the fear he instilled in an admiral. Kazan then turned his attention to Robin, questioning Luffy's trust in her. Luffy confidently declared that Robin was his friend and that anyone who wanted to harm her would have to go through him first, which brought smiles to his crew's faces. Kazan warned Luffy about Robin's past betrayals, but Luffy dismissed the concern, asserting that Robin was safe with him. He had already proven his strength by overcoming significant threats and was determined to protect her from Kazan as well. The storm intensified around them, reflecting the brewing conflict. Kazan stated that he couldn't let Luffy leave the island, to which Luffy countered that he wouldn't allow Kazan to harm his crew. He took off his captain's coat and draped it over Robin's shoulders, then placed his straw hat on Nami's head, urging the crew to retreat to the ship. Luffy acknowledged their strength but reminded them they weren't ready for this level of confrontation yet. He instructed them to head to Water 7 and promised to catch up. As the crew hurried away, Kazan prepared to attack, forming ice arrows in his hand. Before he could launch them, a powerful blast of fire struck him, causing a dramatic explosion that shattered the ice. Luffy declared himself Kazan's opponent, watching as Kazan reformed from the waist up, frost covering part of his body. Kazan acknowledged the pain from the attack, and the temperature around them dropped as Luffy's fiery presence intensified. Kazan created an ice sword, and Luffy responded by channeling his own power into his katana. They charged at each other, their weapons clashing in a powerful explosion that shook the island. Realizing their strength was evenly matched, they momentarily separated. Kazan then unleashed a massive wave of ice shaped like a pheasant, rushing toward Luffy. The battle was escalating, and both fighters were prepared for the confrontation ahead. Raising his staff and pointing it towards the incoming ice bird, Luffy began channeling a large amount of lightning into his staff. Blazing Phoenix Fist, Kasai Hooken, he called out, unleashing a massive phoenix-shaped blast of fire that surged towards the oncoming ice bird. The giant fire phoenix tore through the ground as it raced towards the ice creature, while Kazan's ice bird froze the ground in its path. When the two attacks collided, a tremendous explosion occurred, sending tremors far beyond the island. With the crew. The crew had made it back to the ship safely but had to dodge multiple fire attacks. They stood on the deck, watching the island as the ship sailed away in the direction indicated by the log pose. The waters around the island were extremely rough, tossing the ship around violently. Though they were some distance away, they could still feel the effects of the clash taking place. "I hope Luffy is okay," Chopper said, worry evident in his voice. Before anyone could reassure him, they all saw a giant bird made of ice and a massive fire phoenix charging towards each other. When the two collided, a towering display of ice and fire erupted, seemingly battling for dominance. Suddenly, the ocean around them shook as the shockwave from the clash reached them. "Just what is this?" Usopp exclaimed, feeling the ocean tremble. "When gods do battle, the world itself trembles with fear," Robin remarked, her gaze fixed on the fiery and icy spectacle. With Luffy. Luffy watched as his fire phoenix slowly overpowered Kazan's ice bird, making its way towards the admiral, who deftly dodged to the side. As the phoenix crashed and exploded into the ground, Kazan turned his attention to Luffy, only to find him missing. "Looking for me?" Luffy asked, appearing behind Kazan. Turning slightly, Kazan saw Luffy standing there with his Haki-covered fist drawn back. Before he could react, Luffy punched the admiral squarely in the jaw, sending him reeling towards the trees. Teleporting above Kazan as he flew towards the tree line, Luffy covered his foot in Haki and brought his heel down onto the admiral's midsection. Blazing Tornado Kick. Luffy shouted as he struck Kazan's stomach with lightning speed, sending the admiral crashing into the ground and creating a small crater on impact. Landing beside the crater, Luffy looked down at Kazan, who was lying there, staring up at him. "You added Haki at the last second before I hit you," Luffy noted. "That last attack would have broken a few ribs if I hadn't," Kazan replied lazily from the ground. "But even so, you shouldn't let your guard down," he warned, narrowing his eyes. "Ice time capsule," Kazan called, sending a wave of ice rushing towards Luffy. Widening his eyes, Luffy realized too late as the ice reached his feet, quickly freezing him in place. Kazan stood up, cracking his joints. "I doubt that would be enough to actually defeat you," he said, watching as the ice began to smoke and melt away, revealing Luffy standing there, perfectly fine, with fire emanating from his body and a bored expression on his face. "That was cold," he commented, staring at Kazan. The two locked eyes for a moment before Kazan made the first move. "Ice Spike!" Kazan shouted, raising one foot and causing multiple ice spikes to burst from the ground around Luffy. Unbothered, Luffy walked through the ice spikes as if they weren't there. "Fighting a Logia user is always a pain," Kazan sighed, scratching his head, which made Luffy chuckle. "I think it's time we get a bit more serious," Luffy declared as the fire around him intensified. "It'll be a pain, but okay," Kazan replied, the temperature in the area dropping further as the ground around him began to freeze. Luffy raised his hand to the sky. "Blazing Meteor," he called, summoning a giant meteor that hurtled towards Kazan. Realizing the danger, the admiral jumped back, narrowly avoiding the impact as the meteor struck the ground, creating a massive hole and destroying everything in the immediate area. Kazan knelt down, pressing his palms to the ground. "Arctic freeze," he shouted, causing the temperature to drop even further, freezing the ground, trees, and plants on the island. He then raised his arms towards Luffy. "Falling glacier," he yelled, freezing the moisture in the air above Luffy, creating a massive block of ice that began to fall. Luffy, making a fist, drew back his arm, covered it with lightning, and punched the air above him. "Chidori," he yelled, releasing the lightning in a powerful beam that enveloped the falling block of ice, causing it to evaporate instantly. Luffy was ready to taunt Kazan when his observation Haki alerted him to danger behind him. Turning his head slightly to look behind him, Luffy saw Kazan rising from the frozen island with a serious expression. Kazan's Haki-infused fist was already aimed at him. In a similar fashion to Luffy's earlier attack, Kazan delivered a Haki-infused punch to Luffy's face, sending the captain tumbling across the ice. Luffy quickly righted himself and stabbed his sword into the ice to stop his momentum. Once he regained his balance, he narrowed his eyes at Kazan before pulling the sword free and transforming his body into lightning, dashing towards Kazan at incredible speed. Kazan, covering his hands with Haki, raised them just in time to block Luffy's Haki-infused kick, but the force was overwhelming, sending the admiral skidding back 50 feet. As Kazan looked up, he saw a black bolt of lightning rushing towards him. Realizing he couldn't fully dodge it, he turned slightly, allowing the bolt to strike his side. He quickly placed a hand over the wound and froze it to halt the bleeding temporarily. "Haki-infused lightning," Kazan remarked, glancing at Luffy, who was calmly approaching him. "Quite a deadly combo." "I am a deadly pirate," Luffy replied, continuing his advance toward the injured admiral. "It would have been a serious problem for me if you were intent on killing me," Kazan said with a sigh, prompting a chuckle from Luffy. "I would have been in trouble if you were serious about capturing me as well," Luffy responded, stopping in front of Kazan. "I think it's best we end this now before one of us ends up seriously hurt," he added, running a hand through his hair. "I agree," Kazan said lazily, glancing at the storm clouds gathering overhead. "You feel it, don't you?" he suddenly asked, his tone turning serious. "Yeah, a big storm is coming," Luffy replied, narrowing his eyes as he looked out to sea. "The effects will be felt worldwide," he added, causing Kazan to nod. "The peace the government is trying so hard to maintain is about to end," he said with a sigh. "It has only been 4 years since that incident, and we are already heading toward another," Kazan noted, sighing again as Luffy smirked, recalling the past. "And I have a feeling that, like 4 years ago, you will be at the center of this trouble, just like Akagami," he added, which made Luffy chuckle. "As nice as it is to reminisce about the good old days," Luffy said, summoning a thundercloud from the sky, "I have to get to my crew." "I'll be seeing you," he said as he hopped onto the cloud. "I'll see you sooner than you think," Kazan replied, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow. Dismissing it, Luffy and the thundercloud took off into the sky, leaving the admiral behind. Luffy then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, his Vivre card. The small piece pointed in the direction of the larger piece on his ship. Following its guidance, Luffy quickly located his ship and crew. Transforming into lightning, he teleported onto the deck, startling his crew. "Did you miss me?" he asked with a smirk as he appeared on the deck. "Luffy," his crew shouted, except for Ryoma, Zoro, and Robin, who smiled at their captain. Chopper was the first to leap into Luffy's arms, tears streaming down his face. Soon, everyone rushed toward their captain. "Did you win, Luffy?" Usopp asked, looking at him eagerly. "There was no winner or loser, neither of us was serious about hurting each other," Luffy replied, reaching up to grab his hat from Nami's head and placing it back on. "So Akiji is still alive?" Nami asked, sounding slightly worried. "Yeah, I like Kazan," Luffy said, prying himself away from Chopper and walking toward Robin, who was wearing his captain's coat. "You don't have to worry about him," he assured her as he took his coat back. "Yes, Captain." Robin replied with a small smile. "Well then, let's get going to Water 7. Luffy ordered, making his way to his throne. "Aye, Captain," his crew responded enthusiastically. Luffy was now sitting on his throne on the rear deck, sipping a glass of whiskey. It had been about 4 hours since his battle with Akiji. They were currently sailing through calm waters toward water. Luffy got up from his throne and made his way down to the main deck, where his crew was relaxing. "How's our heading, Nami?" he asked as he walked down the stairs. Nami, sitting on a lawn chair with her sister, looked at her log pose before responding. "We are right on course, Captain," she replied, earning a nod from Luffy. "Our next island should be Water 7, Luffy said, looking at his crew. "We should arrive there in 3 days, he added, confusing Nami. "How do you know it's Water 7, she asked, standing up and walking toward him. "Those people who were stranded on the last island said they saw a frog doing the forward crawl," he explained with a smile. "That's Yokozuna, he lives around Water 7 and is always by the sea train." "Sea train?" Usopp asked suspiciously. "That's right, a sea train. It runs on top of the water," Luffy said, surprising his crew. "What's for lunch?" he asked Sanji, ignoring their astonished expressions. "Seafood and some veggies," Sanji replied, shaking off his surprise. Luffy nodded and headed to the kitchen, followed by his crew. Once inside, he sat at the head of the table, with Robin and Nojiko on either side of him. Nami sat beside her sister, Chopper chose to sit next to Robin, while Zoro took a seat at the opposite end of the table. Ryuma sat next to Zoro, leaving Usopp to sit beside Chopper and the seat opposite him for Sanji. Sanji began laying out the food he had prepared for lunch, and Luffy had to admit it was quite the spread. There was grilled sea king meat, baked fish, lobster, shrimp, large crabs, baked potatoes, and salad. "Wow, Sanji!" Nojiko exclaimed, amazed by the delicious-looking food. "This looks amazing." Sanji beamed at the compliment. "Oh, thank you, Nojiko, my love," he replied, his eyes sparkling. "But it was the captain who told me to prepare a feast," he said, causing everyone to turn their attention to Luffy. "Really?" Chopper asked, looking at Luffy. "What's the occasion, Luffy?" Usopp inquired. "Nothing special," Luffy shrugged. "I just figured you guys might be a bit shaken up after witnessing my fight with Kazan," he said, prompting everyone to recall the intense battle. "So, I asked Sanji to prepare a feast to cheer you all up a bit," he added, earning smiles from his crew. "So, dig in," he encouraged, and they eagerly started helping themselves to the food. "That fight with you and that admiral was so cool," Chopper exclaimed, his mouth full and eyes sparkling. "You guys were like bam, bam, boom. And the entire sea shook," he said, mimicking punches with his hooves, making Luffy and Robin chuckle. "That wasn't anything special," Luffy replied, biting into a lobster tail. "Neither Kazan nor I were going all out," he added. "If we were really serious, we might still be fighting," he said, surprising his crew. "I can't believe there are people that strong out there," Nami remarked, reflecting on her past beliefs. Before meeting Luffy and the crew, she had thought Arlong was the strongest. Now, she realized how naive she had been, as the people she encountered in the Grand Line made Arlong seem weak. "There are powerful individuals like Kazan all over the New World," Luffy said, taking a bite of a baked potato. "Now that you've all seen what awaits deeper in the Grand Line, what are you going to do?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he looked at each of his crew members. "I'm going to have to train harder," Zoro declared, narrowing his eyes at Luffy. "I can't be the strongest swordsman if some admiral can intimidate me," he said, causing Luffy to smirk. "Same here." Usopp chimed in, surprising Luffy. "I'm going to become a brave warrior of the sea. I can't be scared of an admiral," he proclaimed proudly. "Yeah. The greatest doctor in the world can't be scared of an admiral," Chopper added, determination on his face. "I plan on charting a map of the entire world, so I can't let an admiral stop me," Nami said, slamming her fist on the table. "I plan on training more with my devil fruit to become the strongest creature in the world, one that even admirals fear to fight," Ryuma stated as he continued eating. "I won't let any admiral stand in my way of reaching the All Blue," Sanji declared, joining in on the enthusiasm. "Yeah. I plan on becoming the most feared woman in all the seas," Nojiko said, raising eyebrows among her crewmates. "How can I allow some Navy admiral to be stronger than me?" she added, clenching her fist. "I thought your dream was to help your sister chart the world," Luffy remarked, turning to Nojiko. "It was, but being out here on the open seas living the life of a pirate has made me realize I want something more," Nojiko replied, her expression resolute. Luffy nodded before turning to Robin, the last crew member who had yet to speak. Robin took a small sip of her drink before saying, "I too will become stronger so I can defend against those who try to stop me from discovering the true history of the world." Her soft yet dignified voice caused Luffy to chuckle, while the rest of the crew's energy dipped slightly at her serious tone. "I expected nothing less from the crew of the future king of the pirates," Luffy said with a laugh, prompting smiles from his crew before they returned to their meal. Just as he was about to say something else, the sound of a transponder snail ringing filled the kitchen. Sighing, Luffy set down his fork, reached into his coat, and pulled out a medium-sized transponder snail and a white one. He connected them with a wire before picking up the microphone. "Yes," he said into the microphone, and his crew turned their attention to him and the snails. "It's Paula," a woman's voice came through. "How are things coming along with the Hino branch?" Luffy asked, picking up his fork again. "Everything is settled for now," she reported. "We set up a makeshift base here until Paul can come to build the actual one," she explained, prompting Luffy to nod. "He sent some people to inspect the island, and they were asking what I wanted the front to be, so I figured I should call you and ask." "It doesn't matter what it is," Luffy replied. "Most of what the Hino branch will do is underground. Whatever you want the front to be on the surface is up to you," he said, surprising her. "It's just going to act as a front to trick the Marines," he added. "I understand," Paula replied. "But whatever it is, it will have to be believable with the number of ships that will be coming through here." "Just build a hotel," Robin suggested from beside Luffy. "A hotel?" Luffy pondered, considering Robin's idea. "That's a clever idea," Nojiko chimed in. "The hotel not only serves as a front but also gathers information on the guests staying there," she explained, prompting Luffy to nod in agreement. "With how widespread the Hino branch is across the world, it will be easy to promote a brand new luxury hotel on the Grand Line," Luffy said, a smirk forming as he considered the possibilities a hotel could offer. "People from all over the world would likely want to visit," Nami mused, contemplating the potential profits. "Why stop at just a hotel?" Luffy suggested suddenly. "We could turn the entire island into a resort. It would provide the perfect cover for all the ships coming in and out with goods," he added. "Wouldn't that be too expensive?" Paula inquired, raising a valid concern. "Don't worry about that," Luffy reassured her. "Paul is very skilled at what he does and has many connections, so it won't cost much," he said before taking a sip of his drink. "Then I'll inform his team that I want to build a resort with a luxury hotel on the island," Paula replied, earning a nod from Luffy. "You could call it the Spider's Tropical Resort," Luffy suggested, causing Paula to giggle through the transponder snail. "I like the sound of that," she said, still giggling. "Anything else to report?" Luffy asked. "Well, we recently set up a temporary information relay center that Marianne is overseeing," she explained, prompting Luffy to nod. "We are now fully connected to all the other branches worldwide, and they are sending information around the clock," she continued, a small smile appearing on Luffy's face at the success of his intelligence network. "That's good to hear," Luffy said, smiling. "We've also been testing how quickly we can spread information globally over the past few days," she added, raising Luffy's curiosity. "After sorting through some gathered information, I chose one that seemed less important and related to all the other branches with instructions to spread it," she said, impressing Luffy. "And the results?" Luffy asked, intrigued by the efficiency of their network. "Within 24 hours, the information made its way back to me with only a few minor changes from the original," she reported, further impressing Luffy. "That's impressive," Luffy said with an approving nod. "That should improve as the branch grows," Robin chimed in. "Exactly, with more people, the information will spread faster," Paula confirmed through the transponder snail. What about the Keaton branch? Luffy inquired, wanting updates on another branch. Let me grab the report I prepared, Paula said, the sound of papers shuffling coming through the snail. Daz has set up shop on Jaya as you suggested, and he has managed to recruit a couple of salvagers, she reported, prompting Luffy to nod, recognizing who those salvagers likely were. Mr. Five and Ms. Valentine recently placed a large order for medicine from the formerly named Drum Kingdom, now the Cherry Blossom Kingdom, she continued, catching Chopper's attention. How is the Cherry Blossom Kingdom doing? Luffy asked, noticing Chopper's reaction. The kingdom is thriving under their new king, Dalton, Paula replied, prompting Luffy to nod. They requested a large number of various herbs from all 4 blues, most of which have already been delivered, only a shipment of spring grass from the West Blue is still on its way, she reported. Thanks to the Keaton branch, they are trading with numerous kingdoms throughout the Grand Line. This shipment of medicine requested by Mr. Five and Ms. Valentine will be the first to leave the Grand Line, she concluded, causing Luffy and his crew to nod in approval. I'm glad everything is going well for Doctorine and everyone else back home, Chopper said, a bright smile on his face. What else do you have to report? Luffy asked. Ms. Merry Christmas and Mr. Four have been busy since they set up in the North Blue, Paula said, piquing Luffy's interest. They brokered an arms deal, supplying weapons to a small kingdom, sold some information to a local mob, and acquired some antique paintings for the King of Nimbus Kingdom, she reported, impressing Luffy. What kind of information did they sell? He asked, curious about the mob's activities. A local marine captain is involved in dealings with pirates and has been unfaithful to his wife, she said, causing Luffy to chuckle. So, we sold the mob the blackmail information for a price of 25 million, she added, catching Nami's attention at the mention of money. Make sure to gather information on the mob as well, Luffy ordered, taking another sip of his drink. If they are going to blackmail the marine captain, we need to document all their dealings, he said, wanting to ensure they had intelligence for future opportunities. I already have people on it, Paula replied positively. Even though Ms. Merry Christmas and Mr. Four have been the busiest, Isaac and the West Blue operations have been the most profitable, she reported, causing Luffy to smirk. Due to the civil war in the Black Raven Kingdom, he was able to exploit the demand for weapons from both the rebels and the royal soldiers, she explained, prompting Luffy to nod, recalling Isaac's earlier updates. He mentioned that to me already, Luffy said, nodding. Well, the war seemed to be winding down, but unexpectedly, a single rebel and a single royal guard reignited the conflict, prompting Isaac to order a new shipment of weapons for both sides, she said with amusement, causing Luffy to smirk. Some strange occurrences, huh, he said, equally amused. Yeah, it was almost as if someone reignited it on purpose, she said, making Luffy chuckle. Aside from that, Isaac managed to recruit many people for both branches in the West Blue and has taken several pirate crews under his banner, all sailing under your flag, she reported, causing Luffy and his crew to smirk. Sounds like he's getting down to business, Luffy commented approvingly. Now, on to the East Blue, Paula said, capturing the crew's attention. Johnny and Yasaku have chosen to set up their main base of operations on the Konomi Islands, at the site of Arlong Park, now renamed Hell's Park, Paula said, causing Nami and Nojiko to widen their eyes in surprise. The people on the island seemed to welcome them with open arms and even assisted in building the base, she added, surprising Luffy, who attributed it to the villagers remembering the duo as part of his crew. With the East Blue being the most peaceful of the 4 seas, there isn't a high demand for weapons. They've mostly been providing clients with forged documents, some rare animal hides, and even exotic pets for a few nobles, she informed, prompting Luffy to nod in understanding. We expect a large order for medicine from the Cherry Blossom Kingdom, but the client hasn't come up with the full amount yet, she continued. The boys seem to be doing well for now, Luffy commented, and his crew nodded in agreement. Anything else to report? He asked after hearing about the latest from all the oceans under his domain. There was a brief moment of silence from Paula before she spoke again. The Marines are aware of us, she said, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. That was fast, he replied. They don't know who's in charge of what, but they know we're out there and what our business is, she explained, making Luffy think for a moment. They also know the organization is run by a mysterious man named Lucifer, she added. Well, aren't they informed? Luffy said with a hint of sarcasm. I've been receiving reports of Cypher Pole agents trying to join our ranks, she said, surprising Luffy. How do you know this? He asked, raising an eyebrow. One of the first things I had the Hino branch do was send some people to join the Marines as spies, while others specifically tried to join Cypher Pole, with only a few who had special abilities being accepted, she explained, causing Luffy to chuckle. I guess Ms. All Sunday was right when she recommended I choose you to head up the Hino branch, Luffy said with a smile, glancing at Robin, who blushed slightly. I aim to please, Paula replied through the transponder snail. I have detailed reports from those spies inside Cypher Pole about the orders to monitor Hell's Company, along with names and photographs of the Cypher Pole agents being sent in as recruits. This makes turning them away much easier, she added with a chuckle. I'll be in Water 7 in the coming days, send me the reports to review, Luffy ordered through the snail. There's a small inn called Heaven on Earth, have someone wait for me there with the reports, he instructed. As you wish, sir, Paula responded. If there's nothing else to report, I'll be going, Luffy said. Until next time, sir, Paula replied before ending the call. He placed the transponder snail back into his coat and returned to his lunch. Business seems to be doing well, Robin commented as she looked at her captain. Yeah, it's progressing nicely, Luffy replied with a smile. The organization was expanding and establishing itself among the most prolific corporations in the world. In about 5 to 6 months, it will be where I need it to be, he added, placing a shrimp in his mouth. In 5 to 6 months, its roots in both the underworld and the conventional world will be so deep that it will be impossible for the Marines or anyone else to eliminate it, Sanji commented before lighting a cigarette. That's true, however, I think in 5 to 6 months is when the trouble will arrive, Nami added, causing Luffy to nod, understanding her meaning. What do you mean, Nami? Chopper asked, turning to look at the ship's navigator. If I recall correctly, she began, placing her finger on her chin as she thought. Luffy once told us about the bosses of the underworld. I don't think they will take it lightly to have their territory encroached upon, she said, prompting everyone to nod in agreement. She's right, Nojiko said, agreeing with her sister. We are going to be ruffling a few feathers in the underworld, she added. Not quite, Luffy said, gaining their attention. Their influence is mainly in the New World. It doesn't stretch over to Paradise, he explained, causing some confusion among his crew. Why is that? Usopp asked, looking puzzled. You would think they would try to secure their influence across the world. Why only stick to one ocean, he inquired. The reason they are only based in the New World is mainly due to the Navy's limited control and presence there, Luffy explained, surprising his crew. The New World is controlled by the 4 emperors, and the Navy doesn't want to start a war with one of them, so they do their best to stay clear of their territory. This allows the underworld and all its businesses to flourish, he informed them. We are the first and possibly the only underworld organization here in Paradise, he added with a smirk before taking a sip of his drink. Which means we are going to profit the most. Nami exclaimed excitedly, envisioning the wealth they would accumulate. Luffy chuckled and shook his head at his navigator's enthusiasm. 2 days later. It had been 2 days since Luffy's encounter with Kazan and his conversation with Paula. The Going Merry was sailing smoothly through calm waters, with a good wind behind them. They were still about a day's journey away from Water 7, but everything was going well. The past 2 days had been mostly peaceful. They had encountered a pirate ship and a merchant trading vessel, which they happily raided for goods and treasure. The crew had also acted on their declarations during the feast 2 days prior to get stronger. Whenever they had free time, they trained on the main deck, honing their abilities with their powers, Haki, or weapons. Luffy was impressed with their dedication to improvement. Their training showed some progress, nothing too major, but progress nonetheless. Nojiko managed to extend the duration of her armament Haki slightly longer than before. She still lacked control, but it was a step in the right direction. Usopp had managed to better understand his observation Haki and spent the entire 2 days training with it and his slingshot. With a few pointers from Luffy, he improved enough to see the fish swimming beneath the ship for a few seconds. Similarly, Sanji dedicated his time to honing his observation Haki when he wasn't in the kitchen. Although he was initially disappointed to learn he was more adept at observation rather than armament, he soon recognized the benefits of observation Haki and chose to focus on that for the time being, planning to work on armament later. Nami and Zoro, on the other hand, split their training time between both armament and observation Haki, with Nami also working on controlling her devil fruit's power. Luffy had thought Nami had an affinity for observation during their training on the abandoned island, but now he was uncertain about her true affinity. Ryuma was also training to maintain his dragon form longer, carrying weights while trying to keep his form and fly with the crew on board. Chopper and Robin, the other devil fruit users alongside Nami, spent the past 2 days experimenting with their respective abilities. Chopper focused on pushing his rumble ball and transformations to their limits, while Robin worked on the number of body parts she could summon and the range of her powers. Luffy had no idea how successful they were in their training. Currently, they were all training in various parts of the ship while Luffy and Ryuma sat on their thrones, gazing out at the back of the ship. Nami, Sanji, Robin, and Chopper were on the main deck, each engaged in their training, while Usopp kept lookout from the crow's nest. Zoro trained at the front of the ship, and Nojiko was at the rear deck with Luffy and Ryuma. As everyone focused on their training, Luffy leaned back in his throne, staring up at the clouds with narrowed eyes. The calm air around the ship made him a bit uneasy, it felt like the calm before a storm. Having experienced many conflicts in the New World, he found such peace to be almost unheard of. I keep forgetting that this is paradise, Luffy thought, standing up from his throne and shaking his head. He decided he was just being paranoid and headed to his quarters to rest. Just as he reached for the doorknob, Usopp's voice rang out from the crow's nest. "Captain!" Usopp shouted, drawing everyone's attention. A fleet of ships incoming straight ahead. He pointed toward the front of the ship, causing everyone to look in that direction. They could barely see the silhouettes of a fleet of ships approaching. "Is it the Marines?" Nami asked as she joined Zoro at the front. Zoro pulled out a small telescope and looked through it. "It's pirate ships," Zoro replied, prompting Luffy to narrow his eyes. He transformed into lightning and appeared beside Zoro. "It's no pirate ship I've ever seen before," Usopp said from the crow's nest as he peered through his telescope. By now, the rest of the crew had gathered at the front of the ship with Zoro, Nami, and Luffy. "That Jolly Roger," Zoro said suddenly, a hint of panic in his voice. "That I recognize it from my bounty hunting days," he added, causing everyone to turn their attention to him, while Luffy's expression grew more serious. "The last time you recognized a Jolly Roger was back in Alabasta," Luffy said quietly. "And that was the Jolly Roger of the Whitebeard pirates." He turned to Zoro. "Is it another one of the 4 emperors?" "No, but close enough," Zoro replied ominously. "It's the Crimson Dawn pirates," he said grimly, causing Luffy's eyes to widen slightly as he stared at the incoming fleet. "Why does that name sound familiar?" Nojiko wondered aloud, echoing the thoughts of many crew members. It was a name they felt they had heard before but couldn't quite place. "It sounds familiar because of a certain incident that made world news a couple of years ago," Luffy explained, recalling the event. "The Crimson Dawn pirates are led by a man who was one of the most infamous pirates on the Grand Line until 3 years ago," he elaborated, his gaze fixed on the approaching ships. "His name is Leon Holton, better known as the Crimson Breaker," he said, causing some crew members to remember why the name was so notorious. "I've heard of him," Sanji said, lighting a cigarette. "They say everything he touches gets destroyed," he added, and Luffy nodded in acknowledgement. "Leon is famous for many things, but 2 in particular stand out," Luffy continued. First, he is a prince from a large kingdom in the South Blue, he said, surprising his crew. Wanting a life of adventure, the youngest son of the king of the Blue Sky Kingdom set out to sea to become a pirate, Luffy chuckled. Somewhere along his journey, he ate a devil fruit, gaining the powers of the break fruit, which allows him to shatter anything he touches, he explained, causing his crew's eyes to widen. With his new powers, he stormed through the Grand Line and into the New World, amassing a bounty of 600 million and a fleet of 25 ships with over 1,000 pirates under his command, Luffy said, instilling a sense of unease among his crew. That sounds scary, Nami said, her voice tinged with fear. As a prince, he was spoiled and arrogant, Luffy said, contempt evident in his tone, ignoring the apprehension of his crew. Him gaining that devil fruit and a little bit of power made him even more arrogant, which is a direct cause for the thing that he is probably most famous for, Luffy said as he watched the ships get a bit closer. 3 years ago, his arrogance led him to believe that he had the power to do the unthinkable and challenge one of the 4 emperors, specifically Big Mom, he added quietly, earning a few gasps from his crew. I remember that, Usopp called from the crow's nest. It was in the papers for about a week, he added, causing everyone to recall why the name sounded so familiar. A lot of people were nervous leading up to the clash, especially the Navy, Luffy continued. They believed he actually stood a chance because he had the numbers on his side, but then reality set in. He spoke grimly, of the 25 ships that made up the armada of the Crimson Dawn pirates, only 6 managed to escape along with the flagship. More than 800 pirates faced defeat at the hands of Big Mom and her crew, he said, causing his crew's eyes to widen in shock. I had heard that Leon fled the New World in fear of Big Mom, but I never actually believed it. It seems that it was true, Luffy said as he walked forward, jumping up onto the figurehead of the Going Merry and staring out at the incoming fleet. So, is he coming here as a friend or foe? Zoro asked, gazing at the Jolly Roger sewn onto his captain's coat. I don't know, but one thing I do know is that the Going Merry won't survive a fight with these guys, Luffy said, causing Usopp's eyes to widen. She is barely holding on as it is, he added, prompting everyone to look around at the ship that had carried them on their journey so far. Nami, Robin, you two go below deck and man the cannons. Luffy ordered, snapping the 2 girls out of their staring. Aye, they replied before rushing below deck. Chopper, man the rudder, Luffy yelled out. You got it, Luffy. Chopper said as he transformed into his human form and rushed into the rudder room. Usopp. Luffy called as he looked up at the crow's nest. You use your slingshot and pick them off from up there, he ordered. We're going to fight these guys? Usopp asked, his voice slightly worried. You just said Merry won't survive, he argued, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at him. Then I'll just have to defeat them before they can attack, Luffy said, looking up at the sky as thunderclouds began to gather thicker than anyone had ever seen. Nojiko, you take the rear, Luffy instructed, and she nodded, taking out her 3-section staff before moving to the back of the ship. Zoro, Ryuma port, Sanji starboard, he added, and the 2 of them nodded and headed down to the main deck, leaving him standing at the front alone as the clouds continued to gather overhead. From a distance, it would appear as though the Going Merry was dragging a world-ending storm behind it. Luffy stood on the figurehead of the Going Merry with his golden staff in hand, staring at the approaching fleet of pirate ships as his coat billowed in the wind. A silence fell over the ship as they sailed closer and closer toward the incoming conflict. The silence was interrupted by the rumbling sounds of thunder and lightning striking the waters around the ship. After about 30 minutes of sailing, Luffy turned to Zoro, Ryuma, and Sanji and gave an order. Raise the sails. Luffy commanded, causing the 3 of them to spring into action. Each grabbed a rope from either side of the mainmast and began pulling. Once the sails were fully raised and no longer catching the wind, the ship began to slow down drastically until it almost stopped completely. Even though the ship was nearly at a standstill, neither Zoro, Ryuma, nor Sanji released the ropes that were holding the sails up, knowing that at a moment's notice, their captain could give the order to release the sails, and they would need to act quickly. As the ship stopped on the water, the thunderclouds overhead did not cease, they continued to encompass the skies over the incoming fleet as well. After stopping, Luffy and the crew could all get a better look at what they were about to face. 12 ships sailed in a V formation, each bearing a different Jolly Roger, but all shared one similar element on each flag, a crimson-red half-sun. At the very center of the formation, leading the fleet of ships, was the flagship bearing the Jolly Roger that Luffy had only ever seen in the newspapers. It was a skull with many cracks in it, with 2 sabers replacing the usual crossbones. Behind the skull and sabers was a crimson-red half-sun taking up the background. Luffy smirked to himself as the fleet came to a stop about 100 feet away from them. By now, the thunderclouds in the sky had filled every inch of the sky for a 5-mile radius surrounding the Going Merry. The elemental demon. Ha 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 ha, a man shouted from the flagship of the fleet. What a lucky coincidence this is, he added before stepping forward and standing on the figurehead of his ship like Luffy. Leon Holton, Luffy said in a calm voice. I thought you gave up being a pirate, he added as he examined the man. Leon was a bit taller than Luffy, with mahogany brown hair framing his face. He wore a white silk shirt only buttoned halfway, exposing a large scar on his chest, along with a pair of crimson pants and a saber strapped to his right hip. Draped around his shoulders was a crimson-red cape connected by 3 golden chains. I would rather die than leave this life. Leon replied with a wide smile. It is nice to see you are still as powerful as I remembered, he said, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow in confusion. You make it sound as though you are familiar with my power, Luffy remarked, staring at Leon. You could say that, Leon replied with a smirk, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. You could say I am a fan of yours, he added, leaving Luffy with a bewildered expression on his face. Ever since I saw the impact you had on that incident 4 years ago, I couldn't help but admire you, he said, making Luffy feel uneasy. It was after witnessing that incident that I decided to go after Big Mom, Leon said angrily, clenching his fist. Don't blame me for leading your people to their deaths, Luffy replied, narrowing his eyes. I'm not, Leon shook his head. It was my own fault. I underestimated the power of one of the 4 emperors, he sighed. What do you want, Leon? Luffy asked, his patience wearing thin. Leon smirked, excitement lighting up his face. I want to join you, he declared, releasing a wave of Conqueror's Haki towards Luffy and his crew. Luffy quickly countered with his own Haki, the 2 forces clashing violently in the space between their ships, causing the sea to churn. Ha 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 ha. Yes. Only someone this powerful can I serve under. Leon shouted, grinning widely. Do not kid yourself, boy, Luffy said calmly, narrowing his eyes. This is not power that you can comprehend. He raised his voice slightly, releasing more of his Haki, overpowering Leon's and affecting 12 of Leon's ships. Crew members aboard those ships began to succumb to the pressure, some even losing consciousness. Luffy, stop using so much Haki. Our crew can't handle that much power right now. Ryuma shouted, and it was true, the crew was struggling to cope with Luffy's immense strength. Amazing. Leon gasped, falling to his knees, breathless under the pressure. What use would I have for someone who can't even stay on their feet? Luffy asked, staring down at Leon. I am not weak. Leon shouted, shakily rising to his feet. He pushed back with more of his Haki, managing to clear his ship just enough for Luffy to raise an eyebrow, a small smirk forming on his lips. That may be true, but compared to me, Luffy began, increasing his Haki's strength further, completely overwhelming Leon's efforts. You are an ant, he said, causing Leon to fall back to his knees as more ships buckled under the pressure. Leon gritted his teeth, looking up at Luffy. He glanced around at his fleet, realizing most of his crew was unconscious, and those still standing were in a similar state. The memory of his defeat at the hands of Big Mom flooded back, igniting his frustration. Please. Leon begged under the weight of Luffy's Haki. You are my only hope to avenge my crew. Luffy regarded him with pity. Come on, Captain, Ryuma said from behind Luffy, prompting him to turn and consider his first mate's words. He may be a good addition, Ryuma suggested, making Luffy contemplate his next move. He released the pressure from Leon and his fleet, smirking at them. Very well, Luffy announced to Leon and the few conscious crew members. I'll give you a shot, he added, eliciting a look of gratitude from Leon as he slowly stood. But you must first pass a little test of mine, Luffy said with a smirk, causing Leon's expression to shift to one of concern. If you and your crew survive, you can join me. If not, then I guess you won't, he added with a chuckle as he turned to walk back to the main deck where Zoro, R, and Sanji were waiting. As Luffy walked away, a sense of dread settled over Leon and his crew. With most of his men unconscious, he felt at a disadvantage. He questioned whether it was right to drag them into danger again, battling with his doubts. Let's do this, Captain, a confident female voice called from behind him, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see his first mate and crew, all displaying unwavering confidence. Yeah, Captain. Let's give them hell, another crew member shouted, and a smile crept onto Leon's face. You guys, he said, shaking his head with a smile before turning to the Going Merry. Bring it on, demon, he yelled with conviction. Hearing the determination in Leon's voice, Luffy smirked as he positioned himself in front of Sanji and Zoro while the rest of Leon's crew made their way up to the main deck. Drop anchor, Leon instructed, puzzling his crew. Captain? Zoro asked, confusion evident on his face. Just do it, Luffy replied with a smirk. I feel like cutting loose a bit, he chuckled, glancing up at the stormy sky. Nodding, Zoro dropped the anchor into the water. Meanwhile, Luffy transformed his body into lightning and teleported to the crow's nest, waiting a few minutes for the unconscious members of Leon's crew to regain their strength. Allow me to show you your place in this world, boy, he thought as he surveyed the fleet. After 5 minutes, he spoke to Leon again. Are you ready? He asked in a monotone voice. Bring it on. Your power does not scare me. Leon shouted confidently, though a hint of worry lingered beneath the surface. What a foolish man you are, Luffy replied, covering his palm in lightning and raising his hands skyward, ready for the challenge ahead. This is not a power you can comprehend, he yelled as a continuous stream of lightning shot from his fingers, reaching up toward the thunderclouds in the sky. As the stream entered the clouds, Luffy cut it off from his end. A loud booming thunder shook the area, followed by a visible wave of lightning rippling through the sky in all directions from where the stream ended. The thunderclouds covered every inch of the sky within a 5-mile radius of the Going Merry. The ripples of lightning traveled to the far ends of the clouds until they disappeared from view. A resounding silence filled the area as everyone looked around, except for Luffy and Leon, who were locked in a tense stare. Leon wore a terrified expression, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. You can't, he began, trailing off as Luffy held up his right palm, still crackling with lightning. He brought his thumb toward his middle finger, preparing to snap. Thunder Palace. Luffy declared before snapping his fingers. Numerous pillars of lightning fell from the sky, crashing into the ocean and remaining in place. Each pillar was about 10 feet wide, scattered randomly. Everyone looked around in awe at the spectacle before them. Pillars descended from the heavens throughout the 5-mile radius around the Going Merry. No one could see the end of the pillars of lightning, all they could do was gape in shock. What kind of power is this? Sanji asked, his cigarette falling from his mouth. I thought I had seen the full extent of his power, Zoro remarked, looking around in amazement. But this is on a whole other level. You can't be serious. Leon shouted from his ship, glancing around. This is, he started, his voice filled with a sense of familiarity. It is even more spectacular now than it was 4 years ago, his first mate said, taking in the countless pillars of lightning that seemed to hold the heavens themselves up. We are all doomed, Leon said grimly. He had witnessed this technique of Luffy's once before, 4 years ago, and it had left no one alive. Relax, I am not going to do what you think I am going to do, Luffy's voice echoed across the area. I did say I was going to give you a fighting chance, didn't I? He asked rhetorically before snapping his fingers again. All the pillars of lightning vanished, leaving countless holes in the ocean. Water rushed into each hole, creating multiple whirlpools that pulled Leon's ships in different directions. The pirates in Leon's fleet screamed as their ships jerked around in the turbulent sea. Someone do something, please, another begged. Man the rudder, the captains of each ship commanded. We will not perish here, one captain proclaimed. Luffy and his crew simply watched as the ships were tossed around by the whirlpools. The Going Merry remained unaffected, anchored in place, far from the chaos. Luffy hopped down to the main deck, where his crew stood, staring in awe. I figured you guys would be used to this by now, he commented nonchalantly. I think it's impossible for anyone to get used to what you do, Captain, Robin replied, and everyone else nodded in agreement. Are you sure it's a good idea to let him join us? Nami asked suspiciously. It shouldn't be a problem, Luffy said, turning to look at Leon's flagship spinning in the ocean. If he really knows who I am, he won't be foolish enough to try something, he added. Isn't this too easy of a test, though? Sanji questioned. I am starting to feel that way, Luffy admitted, noticing that all of Leon's ships were still upright and afloat. Maybe I should have used that technique as it was intended, he whispered, but his crew heard him. How was it supposed to be used? Usopp asked, tilting his head. Luffy smirked and chuckled to himself before responding, let's just say all of them would have been gone already had I not cancelled it when I did, he said with a chuckle, causing everyone to raise an eyebrow at their captain. So, what now? Nojiko asked, folding her arms. Now we just wait for everything to calm down, Luffy said as his throne appeared behind him, and he sat down. We don't have to worry about them attacking us. They're too busy at the moment, he added, glancing around the ocean where Leon's fleet had been scattered by the whirlpools. 2 hours later. It took 2 hours for the sea to settle and the whirlpools to disappear, along with the thunderclouds. The sun had set, and stars twinkled in the sky. Luffy stood on the main deck, watching as the scattered fleet of ships sailed back toward the Going Merry. When all the ships reached the Going Merry, they surrounded the Straw Hats. Luffy stepped forward toward Leon's ship, with Ryoma slightly behind him. You seem to have found some capable people to sail with you, Luffy complimented as he approached. Thank you, Leon replied with a tired smile. I wouldn't be alive without them, he added, earning smiles from his crew and fleet. Come aboard, and let's get this over with, Luffy ordered, stepping back and motioning for the pirate captain to come on board. Leon looked behind him and nodded to someone before both of them leaped from their ship onto the Going Merry. When they landed, Luffy got a good look at the person beside Leon. It was a woman he recognized as the first mate of the Crimson Dawn pirates. She had blonde, curly hair tied in a ponytail, revealing a radiant face. Her clear blue eyes watched warmly over the crews they had grieved with for so long. Scars traced from just under Emily Masser's left eyebrow to her upper lip, ending at her left nostril, a reminder of her past encounter with Big Mom. This was the face of the Red Fist, the first mate of the Crimson Dawn pirates. She stood confidently among her crew, her athletic frame and captivating presence hinting at a sense of freedom. Who might you be, beautiful lady? Sanji asked, rushing forward to kiss the back of Emily's hand, catching her off guard. Luffy sighed and shook his head before speaking. Nami, he said, just as his navigator appeared behind Sanji and pulled him away by the ear. DMN perverted cook, Zoro muttered under his breath. Luffy turned his attention back to the duo and said, let's get this over with, as he moved toward his throne and sat down. Leon took a seat on the deck in front of Luffy, while Emily remained standing behind her captain. Luffy glanced at Zoro and Sanji, giving them a slight nod. The two walked into the kitchen for a few minutes before returning, Zoro carrying a large red sake cup in one hand and a smaller one in the other, while Sanji brought a barrel of alcohol. Zoro placed the large sake cup between the two captains, closer to Luffy, and set the smaller one in front of Leon. Sanji positioned the barrel off to the side. Leon nodded, approached the barrel, and opened it. Seeing the contents, he turned to Luffy with a puzzled expression. "Whiskey?" he asked. "Yeah, I hate sake," Luffy replied, prompting Leon to nod. The captain of the Crimson Dawn pirates poured whiskey into Luffy's cup, filling it to the brim, and then poured some into his own cup before returning to his seat. "Please allow me to make an oath," Leon said, lifting his cup with both hands. Luffy nodded and grabbed the large cup, holding it in front of him as he awaited Leon's words. "From this day forward, I, Leon Holton, captain of the Crimson Dawn pirates, hereby pledge my loyalty to the elemental demon, Monkey D. Luffy. Together with my crew and my fleet, we shall be his shield and sword, however he commands us. I drink from the sun's cup of my own volition, devoting my life and soul to you." Leon declared with conviction, then drank the whiskey. Luffy smiled slightly and raised his cup to his lips as well. "I accept your oath," Luffy said before finishing the whiskey in his cup. They both set their cups down and exchanged small smiles. Before they could speak, Leon's crew erupted in cheers. "They seem happy," Nami commented as they looked around. "Luffy is so cool," Chopper exclaimed, gazing up at Luffy with admiration, making him smile and chuckle. "Normally, we would have a banquet to celebrate this new alliance," Luffy said, standing from his throne and reaching out to help Leon up from the floor. "But I'm in a bit of a rush to get to Water 7, he added. "I understand," Leon replied with a smile as he stood. "How long have you been in paradise?" Luffy asked, studying his new subordinate. "Since my fight with Big Mom," Leon answered, his voice tinged with pain as he clenched his fist. "Ever heard of an island named Jaya?" Luffy inquired, prompting Leon to raise an eyebrow. "Yeah, I've heard of it. We visited Mock Town several times. I believe we have an eternal pose for that island," Leon said, looking back at Emily for confirmation. She nodded, affirming they did indeed have an eternal pose for Jaya. "Wonderful," Luffy said with a smile. "Make your way there and look for a man named Daz Bones. I will let him know you are coming," he instructed, causing Leon and Emily to exchange curious glances. "He will direct you to a woman named Paula, who, along with you, will oversee all of my operations here in paradise," Luffy explained, leaving the pirate captain and his first mate even more puzzled. "Your operations?" Leon asked, confusion evident in his tone. "Paula will explain everything to you," Luffy replied, waving his hand dismissively. "I will inform her to expect you and give her permission to brief you on your role here." "What will my role be exactly?" Leon asked skeptically. "For the most part, you will be in charge of everything here in paradise," Luffy stated, surprising Leon. "You and Isaac are my commanders, or generals if you prefer," he elaborated, glancing out at the sea and a few ships. "Isaac oversees everything in the West Blue, and you will manage everything here in paradise," he said, prompting Leon to nod in understanding. "Where do I fall in the rankings?" Emily asked, her voice calm, drawing everyone's attention. "Leon and Isaac are equal in rank," Luffy replied, earning a nod from both. "And my crew outranks all of you," he added, causing Leon and Emily to survey Luffy's crew. "Isaac outranks your crew and fleet, while you outrank his," he clarified, leading Leon to nod again. "Isaac has a fleet?" Leon asked, surprised. "I asked him to gather more pirates to sail under my flag," Luffy explained, prompting a nod from Leon. "I take it you want me to do the same?" Leon asked, and Luffy smiled. "Yes, I do," he replied with a smirk. "Make sure to add a straw hat to your Jolly Roger and every Jolly Roger in your fleet," Luffy ordered. "You got it," Leon replied with a small salute. "There are a few islands here in paradise under my protection," Luffy said seriously. If you and your fleet show up on one of these islands and I hear that you caused any trouble, he trailed off, his tone turning cold. There will be consequences. You can rest assured, I will keep my people in order, Leon promised. Well then, that's everything I think, Luffy said, feeling he had conveyed all necessary information. To Jaya then? Leon asked. To Jaya, Luffy confirmed with a nod. I will be in touch if anything comes up, he added, prompting Leon to nod before turning to his first mate. Let's go back, he said, and Emily nodded in agreement. The two waved goodbye to the Straw Hats before leaping back onto their flagship. Set a course to Jaya. Leon shouted for his fleet to hear. Aye, Captain, his crew responded, jumping into action. Soon, all 12 ships began sailing away from Luffy and his crew, causing the straw hat-wearing captain to let out a tired sigh as he plopped down on his throne. Nami, resume our course to Water 7, Luffy said, exhaustion evident in his voice. Nami smiled and nodded, making her way to the rudder. Raise the anchor and release the sails. Nami called out, and Usopp, Sanji, and Chopper scrambled to follow her commands. Hopefully, we get there without any further delay, Robin said with a smile, and everyone nodded in agreement. The Going Merry resumed its course to Water 7 while the 12 ships of the Crimson Dawn fleet sailed away in the opposite direction. As the King's Gourd approached the station, Chopper shouted in excitement, "Wow! I can see train tracks through the ocean water. How did they do this, Luffy? I don't have all the details, but apparently these tracks are extremely buoyant. They won't sink, even with the weight of a train loaded with cargo and passengers," Luffy explained. Water 7 is famous for its carpenters and craftsmen, and we might even take a train to St. Polar, as Shanks mentioned. Wait! There's a giant frog doing the front crawl. Usopp exclaimed, and soon everyone echoed his words. Luffy looked a bit annoyed, not just with the mimicry. Yokozuna! Get over here now! Luffy roared, his voice echoing across the water, startling the crew. The massive frog froze mid-crawl and slowly approached Luffy, who was tapping his foot impatiently. How many times do I have to tell you to stop challenging the train? Even I wasn't that reckless before. The giant frog looked down in shame, unaware that Umi was nearby after hearing the roar. After a stern scolding, Luffy sighed. Still, I'm glad we ran into you. We need to speak with Kokoro about getting our ship into Water 7. It's finally that time. The frog nodded and began to swim toward the station. Nami, turn the ship portside and then straight. Luffy instructed, still in a better mood despite the earlier fright. Once they were within docking distance, Luffy jumped ship to land on the base. Come on guys, we need to get those directions and try not to stare. This old lady was there when the sea train was first made and even saw the Oro Jackson being built. A few others followed their captain just in time to hear an old lady with long ponytails and a cheerful demeanor approach. Najia. I see our friend the frog has turned the youngster sour, she exclaimed, a grin on her face. You're looking good for yourself, youngster. You even got your own ship. If you're going to drink, I hope you have good taste, Luffy replied, playfully swiping the old lady's wine bottle and pouring it into the ocean. There, try it now. The old lady took a sip and let out a satisfied breath, looking a bit more sober. Good stuff, youngster, thanks, she said, taking another drink. The Straw Hats were amazed at her resilience. Is that you, big brother? I heard you angry at Yokozuna. That scared me and my cat, a little girl with a blue-furred rabbit said, looking frightened. Luffy felt a pang of guilt. Yeah, sorry about that, Chimney. It's nice to see you again, he said with a genuine grin, rubbing the little girl's head. Chimney was a vibrant girl with green hair and pigtails, wearing a short white shirt over a striped dress. Her giggle brought a smile to Luffy's face, but it didn't please Chopper, who felt protective. Hey! Luffy is my big brother. Chopper shouted, pulling Luffy away from Chimney. Ow! Luffy protested, not appreciating the sudden intervention. I don't want any arguments from you, Chopper. Chimney means no harm, and you are not to bully her. Am I understood? Chopper nodded, not wanting to see Luffy upset again. The old lady, Kokoro, had sobered up enough to hand Luffy a letter for the mayor of Water 7, revealing that they had shared drinks in the past. It became clear that this man was not only in charge of the city but also the best shipbuilder among the many employed in his carpentering company. Let's just say that this guy was beloved by everyone who lived in Water 7. Soon enough, by following the tracks and ensuring their giant cargo was not lagging behind, the Straw Hats arrived at Water 7. It was like a giant palace floating in the ocean. A fisherman called out, "Hello there. Are you pirates?" The senior members recalled a certain island that had been friendly to pirates, and they hoped not to relive that experience. Luffy merely pointed to their flag and sails displaying their Jolly Roger. Oh. Then please take the entrances over there. The others are for marine and merchant ships, so don't get them confused. And what's that behind you? We love to hunt for treasure, and we hit the jackpot on the last island. Enough said, and thank you for the directions. Luffy responded, and both vessels turned portside to where pirate ships were to be docked. This time, it was not a scam or a tourist trap. Water 7 genuinely cared for ships, whether they were pirate ships or otherwise. Soon enough, a group of carpenters appeared, greeting them enthusiastically. One was a massive man with a bare torso and a bag filled with tools on his back. Another wore sunglasses and had a persistent cowlick that sprang back up every time he pushed it down. The last was dressed like a biker with a couple of lit cigars in his mouth. Are you here for repairs? Actually. Luffy said as he jumped down, followed by the rest of his crew. We have a rather tall order. The carpenters exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Can you build us a new ship around the same size or bigger than our main one, but made entirely out of atom wood? The trio was taken aback, with the biker even dropping his cigars. WL. Peeply Lulu, the one with the cowlick, struggled to find the words. The T thing is.is. Tilestone, the big fellow, shouted loudly, also at a loss for words. We can dot, but we will have to get the boss to decide, Polly, the biker, said confidently. After all, atom wood can only be bought on the black market if you already know where to look. And even if you can find that much, it will be quite expensive. We will worry about the costs later. Can it be done? Luffy asked, and the trio nodded in agreement. Then can I ask that you bring the king's gourd to where you can work on it while telling us where we can trade our treasure for cash? The carpenters pointed into the distance. Thanks. Luffy then approached the smaller vessel, causing the three carpenters to faint when they saw the giant golden bars underneath the cloth. Nami, Nojiko, you two will be coming with me for the gold exchange, the others stay on the ship. Luffy spoke in a tone that made everyone nod, a bit intimidated. After all the crazy and impossible feats, the Straw Hats were hardly surprised. Luffy summoned a huge thundercloud capable of carrying the treasure and the weight of 4 people as everyone loaded the gold onto the cloud. He created a throne for himself and 3 chairs for Nami, Usopp, and Nojiko, and they all ascended into the air to exchange the gold for berries. Soon enough, a bank came into view, but what caught Luffy's attention was the massive crowd forming in front of it. As the cloud descended gently, the crowd stepped back to make way. Once Luffy placed the bars on the ground, he instructed, "Look but do not touch, okay?" "Of course, Sir Luffy," the police responded, forming a perimeter to keep anyone from getting too close to the massive find. "Don't get smug, I have bigger plans to take down the world government," Luffy muttered to himself. "Now, can someone from the bank please come up and calculate how much this is worth? And you better be honest, both girls know the truth, and one can steal your heart while the other can spot any lies when it comes to money." He glanced at Nami, who let out a growl to emphasize his point. The bank tellers in the crowd gulped nervously before taking measurements of the gold. After a while, they reached a conclusion. 5 billion berries. Usopp shrieked, his voice echoing throughout the city, prompting the crowd to repeat the statement in disbelief. Luffy rubbed his chin, holding up his girlfriend, who was on the verge of fainting. DMN, that's worth more than a Yonko and its crew put together, all in one package. Everyone ignored that remark, focusing instead on the gold bars and the amount announced by the professionals. The crowd began demanding that Luffy, the elemental demon Straw Hat, share the money with them. Enough. Luffy's voice boomed, silencing the crowd. Now then, I can't share any of this just yet. I will need the word of the big boss, right Mayor Iceberg? Correct, Sir Luffy, a man responded, and the crowd cheered for him as if he were a superstar. Iceberg was a tall man with blue hair and similarly colored lips, dressed in a red and orange striped jacket over an unbuttoned orange shirt, black suit pants, and black shoes. I happen to be the mayor and head of the Godlike Company, so I basically run the entire island. How about cutting the amount in half and giving one of them to us? Iceberg suddenly felt like a rabid dog trying to bite his face off until its owner grabbed hold of the collar. Easy, Nami, he is just relaxed, Luffy said calmly, holding back his crew, who were not happy about handing over 2.5 billion berries to a stranger. And I think we can share some of the money since we don't need the weight sinking our new ship. What about giving away a fourth of the money instead? Nami ceased her aggressive behavior, settling for a pout. Fine. But I still don't like it. Nami looked like a 5-year-old girl watching her old clothes being given away. How about we spend the day shopping once we sort out the paperwork? We can even take your sister and Chopper along, Luffy offered to cheer her up. Nami looked away with a pout, but after some explaining from Luffy and Nejoko, she finally understood and agreed to give 2.5 billion berries to Iceberg. Her pout faded, and she uncrossed her arms, though she was still frustrated as her body temperature rose due to her devil fruit ability. The crew observed Luffy's cleverness in calming an angry crewmate, taking notes on how to manage such situations. Meanwhile, while everyone else was busy with their tasks or watching the going merry, Robin strolled through Water 7, enjoying the pleasant weather. Suddenly, her instincts alerted her that she was being watched. Despite her powers, she couldn't detect anyone following her. Just as she was about to continue on her way to ease her nerves, a large figure in a heavy cloak and mask passed by her, stating, "I am with CP9." Those words sent a chill down Robin's spine, and she froze in fear. When she turned to look again, the figure had vanished, leaving her shaken and with tears in her eyes. Why are we here? This place is a dump, Usopp complained as he and a few others remained at the going merry. They were hopeful about their ship getting an upgrade, but there were concerns about the Godlike Company hesitating to provide the necessary materials. Luffy had managed to strike a deal. The Straw Hats would be given the location of the black market to buy wood, and the company would use it for the King's Gourd without any connection to the illegal purchase. This way, the Straw Hats would receive a new and improved ship designed for the new world, while Water 7 would remain in good standing with the world government. Sanji grumbled about being dragged out to an undesirable location, and while the others murmured in agreement, Robin remained silent and troubled since her encounter with the masked figure. Luffy reassured Sanji, saying, "I understand, and we won't be here long. We just need to meet someone who will help with our ships." He added, "Now come on. I can't stand this place either." Suddenly, a group of rough-looking individuals burst through the door, exclaiming, "Look! It's the Straw Hat Pirates. Their captain is the demon Straw Hat, who destroyed the Buster Call with his crew." Luffy responded with a polite smile, "To meet your boss. Is he in?" It didn't take long for a pair of doors to swing open, revealing a man who stood just a foot away from Luffy. "You better not have hurt any of my brothers, Demon Straw Hat," he warned. "Now, why did you want to see the boss of the dark side of Water 7? "I wanted to meet the other student who learned under Tom, who calls himself Frankie," Luffy replied, employing his usual trick of reading minds, which his crew had grown accustomed to. Frankie, a towering figure with a muscular build, glared at Luffy with a mix of shock and anger. I've heard about a pirate apprentice who has sold out countless secrets. Now quit reading my mind. Luffy shook his head and replied coolly, you need to empty your mind more often or keep those thoughts to yourself. His crew chuckled at Frankie's embarrassed reaction. But we do need to talk because I have an offer that you've been waiting years to hear. Out with it, Frankie said, his face still flushed. I have a ship made in the East Blue that has made it here but won't survive in the New World. We have enough money for Atom Wood with plenty left over, Luffy began, then added, I want you to make your dream ship with the wood and use our main vessel as an understudy. The Straw Hats exchanged shocked glances, hoping their captain knew what he was doing. Frankie was taken aback by the suggestion. You want me to make my dream ship? My dream died when that idiot got run over by a train. Besides, I'm not a shipwright anymore. I'm a bounty hunter, a criminal, a dismantler. I don't make ships, I take them apart. Silence fell over the group. Frankie saw that none of them were backing down. I mean it, he said, raising a hand to his face to hide the tears that were beginning to flow. I gave up on my dream and wanted to fade away, to just rot without anyone bothering me. Why do you want me to work on your ship? Because Tom said there should never be shame in building a ship, even if a criminal uses it, Luffy replied. He then motioned for Ryoma to step forward with a large black case. After converting gold to berries, another 5 billion was sorted into 5 large cases. Half was entrusted to Iceberg as goodwill to the city, while the other half was for the Straw Hats. Even Nami wasn't greedy enough to place 10 billion berries in bills that could sink a ship. Ryoma opened his case to reveal the money for Frankie and the others to see. I know you know where the market will be, so gather all the atom wood you can find. This should cover it. Frankie quickly grabbed the case as Ryoma closed it shut. You are one incredible guy, he mumbled. I will not only build my dream ship but one you've never seen before, Straw Hat. Come on, everyone, we have a train to catch. Later, at the Going Merry, Usopp remarked, if I didn't know you for this long, Luffy, I would think you were a madman. Hiring a criminal to work on our new and improved ship just because he worked under a master carpenter years ago. What's the big deal about this Tom character? This question lingered in everyone's minds, and they knew Luffy had gotten the information from Frankie's open head. Tom is a fishman, a blowfish fishman, and the carpenter who built the Oro Jackson. The very ship that carried Roger to the end of the Grand Line and made him the king, Luffy replied, enjoying the shocked expressions on his friends' faces. And Frankie can deny it all he wants, but as an apprentice to the world's best shipbuilder with a dream, he is the best man to make us a ship to sail the new world. After a moment of silence, Ryoma spoke up. It's clear we can just pick up his signature if he returns with the new wood. But can we be sure he will keep his promise? Luffy didn't attempt to answer that tricky question. Instead, he stated, from what I gathered from the mayor, it takes a day or two to make the trip with the sea train to St. Polar to find the market and get back with the atom wood. I suggest we take a break from sailing for a while. He asserted this with the authority of a captain. And if Frankie tries to back out of our deal, we'll make him regret it. Sadistic smiles spread across everyone's faces at the thought of that unfortunate man in a Speedo, covered in bruises. By the way, has anyone seen where Robin went? Somewhere on the shoreline where the Going Merry was docked, Robin was feeling unwell and stopped at a boulder, questioning herself. Tears streamed down her face as she thought, why can't I just decide? Why can't anything be easy for once? Well, crying never solves anything, it just draws attention. Robin's heart raced as she turned to see her captain standing before her. I sensed something was wrong in the city to make you act like this. So, what's troubling you? Why should I tell you? Robin retorted. You're just another clone because I can easily see the differences in person. The real captain used to have a strong scent of perfume instead. She hoped no one would hear that last part, but knowing Luffy, it was likely he did. The boss wasn't trying to fool you, Robin. You know he would be happy to help. The clone didn't deny the accusation and remained still as a dozen hands and arms held it in place. Please, Robin, tell us. Even if it's the whole world, your friends will fight for you. That's a promise. Robin had never encountered anything like this and gritted her teeth. Fine, she said after what felt like an eternity. I'm going to be killed by their promise to not harm them. She leaned closer to the clone's ear and whispered, Cipher Pole 9. This was followed by a sudden splash. Back on the Going Merry, Luffy suddenly spoke up, capturing everyone's attention. Cipher Pole 9. He continued, I'm not surprised they would be here. Water 7 is just doing what they do best, even if they accept pay from pirates. Luffy mumbled, his voice barely audible. After arriving in Water 7, he had received information about Cipher Pole 9 from his organization, and it was shocking to learn they were present. What's Cipher Pole 9, Luffy? Chopper asked, pulling the captain from his thoughts. Is it bad? You look serious, and you only do that when things are bad. Almost the entire crew nodded in agreement, and Luffy sighed. First, have you all been keeping up with your Rokushiki training? Everyone stood at attention and confidently affirmed, which relieved Luffy a bit. Good, because Cipher Pole 9, or CP9, are very dangerous. They are a group of undercover intelligence officers who are also trained fighters. They investigate cases in secrecy, and if given a mission to eliminate someone, they can do so effectively. They are all masters of Rokushiki. That last revelation hit hard. Luffy continued, I also heard about their ace, Rob Lucci. He is a Rokushiki prodigy. When a certain kingdom was taken over by pirates, Lucci killed all 500 guards used as hostages. When the pirates tried to attack him, their cannonballs barely left a mark. His power is known even to the Shichibukai. He glanced at Chopper and Nami, who looked frightened. Why did this Lucci guy kill the guards? Why didn't he go after the pirates? It was pointless to shield Nami from the harsh realities of their world, especially after everything she had experienced. Luffy had convinced her sister to trust that Nami could handle the truth. My guess is that Lucci follows a brutal form of justice. He decided to remove the hostages so the Marines could free the country without any obstacles. It was cruel, but it worked, Luffy explained slowly. And what do these CP9 people want with us regarding Robin? Ryuma, no longer just a vice captain but a friend willing to protect his crew and captain, pieced it together. They are after Robin for her ability to read the poneglyphs and possibly find the ancient weapons. Correct. That's why I must ask that if they succeed in capturing Robin, you all must be ready to face trained fighters skilled in all aspects of Rokushiki. As captain, Luffy questioned whether he could ask his crew to follow such a selfish order. The silence from his crew spoke volumes, their expressions conveyed unwavering loyalty to him. The next morning would be etched in the memories of all Water 7 residents. The Straw Hats, however, were prepared for what was to come. It all began when Iceberg awoke to find a cloaked figure emerging from the wall of his bedroom. The larger figure opened the wall as if it were a door and then closed it seamlessly behind him. I ate the doe no mi, door fruit. I can make a door out of anything, the figure declared, brandishing a gun at the mayor. Now that we have your undivided attention, we ask that you hand over those plans. Before Iceberg could respond, Luffy, comfortably perched in the open window, interjected, that won't be necessary. After all, what you want is not here. He smiled at the masked figure, who appeared shaken with anger, shock, or perhaps a mix of both. This has nothing to do with you, Demon Straw Hat. This is government official business, and we don't want interference from you pirates, the large man retorted. Luffy chuckled, of course. My issue is with you taking Robin as your date. Considering your day job, you make the bartenders look bad, Blueno. In an instant, Luffy unmasked the large man, revealing Blueno, who ran one of Iceberg's favorite bars. Blueno quickly discarded his costume after his bear mask was removed. Blueno was a tall man with distinct features, dressed in a black suit with a white handkerchief in his BRST pocket. Don't think we at CP9 are unaware of your annoying ability to read minds, Mujiwara, he warned. I'm only here because I happen to like the mayor, and this whole town does too. He is one of a kind, you know. Luffy replied, not bothering to correct Blueno's old assumption. I also want Robin back because we plan to leave soon as our new ship is built. I even hired Iceberg's closest equal shipbuilder to construct it without any strings attached. Frankie. Why would you want to pay that pervert anything? We can build your ship just fine. Iceberg exclaimed, feeling a bit scandalized. I'm sure we can make a ship for the new world. And you will, after our wood arrives from St. Polar, Luffy shot back, slightly annoyed. Robin remained silent, trying to keep her mind clear while her captain was nearby. I'm afraid your order will be cancelled, as we are also aware of your fellow apprentice, Cutty Flam. He will be going with us, along with Nico Robin, Blueno stated calmly. Iceberg was shocked, while Luffy had anticipated this outcome. Suddenly, the double doors to the bedroom burst open. You are too slow, Blueno. We already searched the entire mansion, the blueprints are not here. A young man walked through the smoke and halted upon seeing Luffy. Monkey D. Mujiwara Luffy, the demon Straw Hat and the only person who has formed an alliance with one of the Yonko. I must say, I respected your handling of evil even before becoming an equal of Akagami no Shanks. And do I get to meet my #1 fan, the ace of CP9 himself, Rob Lucci? Luffy replied, recognizing the young man's expression. Rob Lucci was tall and slim, yet muscular, with arched eyebrows and a close-shaved goatee. He had shoulder-length wavy hair, sometimes tied in a ponytail, and a white pigeon perched on his shoulder. Dressed in a black suit with rolled-up sleeves, he continued, now if you don't mind, we have places to be, and the demon child is coming with us. Blueno, deal with him. Just as Lucci turned his back, he heard a loud crack and a pained scream. He glanced back to see Blueno on the ground, clutching his hand. Only a fool will hurry to his death, Luffy stated, revealing that Blueno's finger was injured. It will take a lot more than that to kill me, if you are up for it, Luffy challenged Lucci, thickening the tension in the room. Enough. Robin suddenly shouted, capturing everyone's attention. I don't want to go back, Captain. I am a demon child, and I am tired of running. Just by standing here, I threaten everyone in the world. I need to do this. She paused, her emotions spilling over. Lucci grinned, Blueno winced in pain, Iceberg was speechless, and Luffy remained unfazed. He understood that Robin was not truly willing to go with them but had concealed her feelings for years. Please, I need to do this. Everywhere I go, everyone suffers and hates me, you will be next. She is right, Mujiwara, Lucci interjected. She is evil incarnate, and you will thank us for getting rid of such scum. The world will be safer once we finish this simple job. Luffy remained silent. It will be my pleasure to carry out my style of justice, dark justice. Lucci tightened his grip on Robin's arm, but Luffy swiftly grasped Lucci's wrist with a vice-like grip. First, tell me something, Luffy demanded. When Lucci didn't respond, he continued, when I first arrived here, I noticed that you and your group had your sights set on Iceberg. Were you ordered to eliminate him, or was that your choice? Don't tell me you were going to assassinate a beloved figure for your government. Lucci gritted his teeth, clearly displeased with the implication. There are some of us who still believe in putting our duty to the just government first, Lucci finally replied, shocking both Robin and Iceberg. They couldn't believe that the world government would harm their own people to achieve their goals. Luffy expressed his disbelief, stating, I don't see patriotism here. All I see is someone using an excuse to cause harm without caring about the consequences. Lucci, frustrated, attempted to kick Luffy, but the pirate blocked it and countered with a sweep of his leg. Lucci let go of Robin to regain his balance and disappeared in a flash. He tried to strike Luffy from behind, but Luffy's quick reflexes redirected the attack to the floor. Anticipating Lucci's next move, Luffy transformed into lightning, evading the attack. After a rapid exchange of blows, both fighters reappeared, with Luffy pressing his trident against Lucci's neck and hands. "I think I've made my point, Rob Lucci," he declared. "Go ahead, finish it," Lucci replied, cornered and with no escape. However, Luffy chose to spare him. "That's too easy. I don't want to start a riot in this city. My crew and I will bring the fight to you to get Robin back. Until then, your life is at stake with this promise, Robin is not to be harmed." Lucci realized Luffy meant business and stood up. "Why should we help you?" "We only answer to the government," he challenged. "Because there's no honor among thieves," Luffy responded. "You pride yourselves on honor, and I believe you will keep your word, unlike your director." Lucci and Blueno exchanged glances, the latter finally managing to fix his finger. "Fine. We will honor our word. Just be prepared to face us if you want to keep Robin," Lucci said before both agents vanished with her, leaving Luffy and Iceberg in the room. "Just what kind of pirate are you?" the mayor asked, bewildered. Luffy simply smiled before disappearing in a flash of lightning, prompting Iceberg to grab a coat and rush out. As if the situation wasn't dire enough, the annual disaster known as Aqua Laguna was approaching. This extreme high tide usually caused minimal damage due to the city's construction, allowing residents to escape the waters. However, one civilian pointed out, "I don't remember the waves being this big last year." Others agreed, and then Luffy arrived, observing the impending disaster. "We had an encounter with Kazan, who created a pathway between two islands. He was right, the ice melting caused the waves to grow larger," Luffy explained. Panic spread among the civilians. "What do we do?" they cried out. Luffy, frustrated, tried to calm them down. "Don't shout. I have my vice captain here." The crowd quieted. "This is likely a one-time event. Everyone should stay inland as much as possible. Once it's over, you'll have a lot of work ahead." The civilians sprang into action, spreading the warning, unaware of the lightning streaks and black blurs moving through the crowd. Both phenomena converged where Luffy stood, who remained focused on the horizon. "Is everything ready?" he asked. "Yes, Captain," Ryuma replied, appearing from the blur as the thunder intensified. Luffy's expression darkened when Nami and her sister joined him. "My guess is that Robin still doesn't want to return," Nami said. Luffy nodded grimly. "Those from CP9 only care about their jobs, but I saw it in her eyes. She wants to end over 20 years of fear. Just tell me where we're going, and I'll find the way. Everyone else will ensure we get there," Nami offered. Luffy adjusted his treasured hat, revealing his determined gaze. "They're heading to one of the main locations connected to Marine headquarters and Impel Down, Eni's lobby. It's known as the Island Without Night, where criminals are judged. That's where Robin will be returned to us, by force if necessary."